Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the March Cabinet meeting. My name is Councillor Millie Earle. I'm the leader of the council, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. My deputy, Councillor Mike Cox, is not next to me as he would usually be, but instead he's joining us online. I'd like to welcome members of the public who have given up their time to be here with us today, and of course to Cabinet members and other councillors who are in the room and online. First of all, I'm just going to hand over to Democratic Services to go over the housekeeping for today's meeting.
Thank you. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point at the War Memorial in the gardens opposite the front of this building in Bourne Avenue. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Thank you. So agenda item 1 is apologies. We've had apologies from Councillor Sandra Moore today. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. I can't see any councillors indicating, but we have had a notice from the monitoring officer who has granted a dispensation to all councillors to enable us to participate and discuss and vote on the community governance review. The granting of that dispensation will also be reported at the next meeting of the Standards Committee. Councillor Hannah.
Just to have it on record that I was a member of the working party for the community governance review, but I believe I'm covered by the dispensation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. I haven't had any other declarations of interest, but if any do come up, then please do let us know. So agenda item 3 is the confirmation of the minutes. That is of the last meeting of Cabinet, which was held on the 15th. Oh, I'm not sure.
5th of February.
5th of February. Thank you, Sarah. I'll be proposing this item. Can I see if I've got someone to second that one?
I'm quite happy to second that, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burton. Can I see a vote from Cabinet that those minutes are correct? Thank you very much. That is unanimous. So on to agenda item 4, which is public issues. We haven't had any petitions or questions submitted from members of the public on this occasion. However, we have received a statement from Lucy Allen, who is of BH Active Travel, which is on agenda item 9 on the local transport plan. Can I invite Lucy to come and put forward her statement, please?
Thank you, Chair. As Chair of Campaign Group BH Active Travel, I would like to thank the Sustainable Travel Officers at BCP Council for their continued engagement with the DFT regarding successful funding applications and delivery of schemes on the ground, for which the active travel community are grateful. Following the visit of 2 relevant portfolio holders to Christchurch last Friday, thank you, Andy and Richard, to join the bike bus and witness the safety issues around the junior school, I trust that Cabinet will today approve the LTP budget and ensure that a substantial proportion of the travel safety measures budget is allocated to the area surrounding the school. Equally, we would welcome some revised cycle infrastructure designs for Barrack Road and Fountain Roundabout, developed in readiness for any future funding. And perhaps in the meantime, some temporary schemes could be trialled. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll address those comments when we get to that item on the agenda. So moving on to agenda item 5, which is recommendations from overview and scrutiny. These are recommendations that are not otherwise included on the agenda. can I please ask if the chairs of those committees have anything that they would like to report? Councillor Bartlett? No. Councillor Rigby? No. Councillor Canavan?
Chair, just to advise that at the meeting that we had of Health and Adult Social Care Overview and Scrutiny last Monday, we did agree to make some recommendations on the adult social care strategy. But as I understand it, this is something that Cabinet's going to discuss in April. So with your agreement, I'd like to take the opportunity in April to put forward those recommendations, if that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Canavan. And yes, we'll look forward to those recommendations from health, adults and health, when we get there. So thank you. Councillor Carl Brown, can I ask if there's anything from Children's? Nope, thank you.
Nothing to add.
Right, so agenda item 6 is the Community Governance Review, draft recommendations. I'm actually going to be asking the chair of the working group to present this report, and then I'll invite Councillor Bartlett as well, as this went to scrutiny last night, but I'm sure the chair might want to cover some points in his presentation. Councillor Walters.
Thank you, Leader, and apologies, the meeting finished so late last night that I've not really had a chance to change my preamble too much today, so if you've heard it already, please forgive me. Firstly, I'd like to thank Richard and the Democratic Services team for their support during this process. You've all been invaluable. The Community Governance Review Task and Finish Group was created in line with the decision made by full council in October 2024. The job of the group was to review the submissions received by our residents for new town and parish councils. After reviewing these suggestions, it was then up to the Task and Finish Group to make suggestions for parishes that we decided to push forward to consultation. The parishes we decided upon were as follows: Poole Town Council, Bournemouth Town Council, Broadstone Town Council, Boscombe and Folkestone Community Council, Southbourne Community Council, and Redhill and Northbourne Community Council. After consultation, the Task and Finish Group will meet back up to review the results of the consultation and make its final recommendations. Those final recommendations may contain some, all, or none of the suggestions made in this report. Last night at ONS, we discussed this in depth. I think it was a 3.5 hour long debate. There was a relatively even split on the Bournemouth town offering, although I believe the chair broke the tie on that one, which is similar to the working group. This was, I think, 5 for it, 4 against it. So it's been a relatively contentious issue, the Bournemouth Town Council, the whole time. So in the immutable law of best of 3, you guys get to put this to bed today. Should every area in BCP, apart from Bournemouth, be parished, it would not only be the only place in BCP that's not parished, it'd be the only area of the whole of Dorset that is unparished, which would leave their residents disadvantaged should they want to get extra services. There was a suggestion that consulting on the Bournemouth Town Council would cost more money. It won't. Everyone in the conurbation has to be consulted as part of this process. It's the legislation. There was an argument that we should start with no recommendations in Bournemouth. Unfortunately, the legislation doesn't allow for this if we're going to make meaningful decisions later on. This just gives us more options. We have to make positive recommendations as a Task and Finish group on this one, in keeping with the legislation. There was a lot of speeches from councillors last night about how there is no appetite for this, and that's fine. If there is no appetite for this, let's find that out in a consultation. I don't want to make any assumptions for our residents when there is the easiest thing in the world is just asking them the question and getting those results. We received a large number of responses to the initial submission when compared to other recent local community governance reviews. The most popular submission in favour of parishing was the creation of a Poole Town Council. I look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walters. I'm going to invite Councillor Bartlett up to give some reflections on the debate and present the recommendations, and then we'll go to other councillors who wish to speak on this.
Thank you, Leader. Morning, Cabinet. Yes, I think it's probably worth saying that it was a very complicated debate last night, and the arguments put forward on each of the recommendations vary considerably from lots of different angles. There's lots of interdependencies between some of the recommendations too, particularly around the Bournemouth recommendation. I'm not going to read out all the recommendations because you've got them on the report in front of you, but I think it's worth pointing out that they were all basically agreed apart from one. And just to correct Councillor Walters, the Bournemouth decision was not tied. It was actually a majority decision. Yeah. So all of the recommendations of the report were basically agreed, with the exception of K, which is the Bournemouth Town, and the recommendation was that Bournemouth Town K not be recommended to Council for approval for publication and consultation. So that was the recommendation on that one. Apart from that, all the others were carried by a majority decision. I think there was one unanimous decision, but in the main, it was fairly close. And I think it's probably an indication of how divisive this consultation may be and how difficult it's going to be to take this process through. I think that's all I need to say. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bartlett. And I'm now going to invite any other councillors in the room who would like to speak on this item. Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to repeat some of what I said at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee last night, but I do want to add my support to the removal of K and the creation or the proposed creation of a town council in Bournemouth, which actually doesn't cover the whole of Bournemouth, only covers part of it. There is no support for that. Nobody proposed it. And that was the main reason why the debate last night resulted in a recommendation to Cabinet to remove it. I'm not going to talk about the others, but I do want to pick up on Councillor Bartlett's point about how divisive this consultation is going to be. I made a comment last night about the initial press release that the BCP media department had issued. What I do not want to see, Chair, is I'm quite happy to have a political argument, a political battle over this. What I do not want to have is a battle with the BCP media department, because I have two members of Parliament who are opposed to this, and I do not want to get into a spat about the nature of that consultation. So I think we need to be careful in terms of what we put out in terms of our communication in future to make it more balanced. In my view, the previous press release was not balanced. So the other thing I think that I wanted to make a point about was when this comes to Council, Councillor Walters made a big stress last night on the fact that all we're asking is for this to go out to consultation. I've made the point about how divisive that is. I'm not going to repeat that. But when it does go out, I think we do have to reflect on what the questions are that we're actually going to ask. So if you're asking me or residents in Boscombe about what they think about the proposed town council in Boscombe, they may well have a view about whether or not they want a town council or community council in Boscombe. What I'm hoping the consultation will do is to also ask that residents whether they want to do anything at all. Because they might have a view about Boscombe, but they also might have a view about the the future of Bournemouth as a whole. And I think that's really quite an important point. So it must go beyond, do you want this council in your area or not? I believe we do have to ask the fundamental question about whether residents want this at all. Because as Councillor Walters has mentioned, we did make a thing about a lack of appetite in Bournemouth for any of this, and I think that has to be tested. That has to be tested by the suitable questions in the consultation. So the other thing is, as I understand it, when the consultation has been completed, as I understand it, it's going to go back to the working group, and the working group are going to assess those consultations. I'm just really asking for some kind of reassurance that once the working group have done that, if there is then, following all of that process, a proposal to create a town council or a community council anywhere, or a new one, anywhere across the BCP, that individual decision is put to council for agreement. That's what I'm seeking your assurance on. Not any kind of block recommendation, but that council as a whole, in the event that we decide to move forward with any of these individual parish councils, gets a vote on whether or not we do that, whether or not we proceed with that. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Canavan. Can I ask if any other councillors wish to speak on this item? Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate that. I was listening. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend ONS last night. I had a mayoral engagement. I was listening to the presentation by Councillor Walters to my right here. One of the things which triggered me a little bit was the nature of the consultation. Because the recommendations are such that it's for parishes, etc., there is a knock-on effect, and we talked about divisiveness. There is a knock-on effect to those parishes or those wards that are neighbouring that parish. So my question or request would be that you would also consult on the yay or nay to have a council, full stop, a parish council, but also you consult with those neighbouring individuals. For many of our wards here will cover, because of the geographics, communities which are actually believe that they're in one or the other, and I know that many of us here would knock on a door and they'll say, well, I don't know what ward I'm in, but I am in Southbourne, I am in Bearwood, I am in Merley, I am in Howe, wherever, and that's what I identify with. So I know that from some of the recommendations, there will be some bids for parts of one ward that go into a recommendation for a parish council. And I think it would be unfair if the individuals that actually lived in that geographical political ward would find that one of their assets goes into the control of a different town council. Now that may be a car park, it may be a green space, but it would create a degree of confusion, should I say, with the ward councillors as regards who they go to if the local authority isn't delivering the services that they expect in that particular area. But I think it would be unfair if those neighbouring parishes, or those neighbouring wards, should I say, didn't have a say in actually, well, I don't think a say in their view of that becoming a parish or a town council. So that would be my sort of plea, as it were, is that the nature and the scope of the consultation and how it goes out, rather than just being digital, is very important as well. As ever, we have a very large demographic that are not in the digital world, and whatever consultation it is, it has to be able to get onto that particular individual's doorstep in that household. So that would be my plea to you, is to consider the knock-on effect to those neighbourhoods and those communities that may, for an arbitrary dividing line, find that they don't get a say, that they want a parish council next door to them, or they want to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Councillor Connolly.
Thank you very much for letting me dial in. I went through some of my concerns about the boundary between Southbourne and Boscombe and Folkestone councils last night. I won't go over all of them again. I just wanted to flag a few things. So I think there's one thing doing a consultation on a parish council for a village, a rural community where there's rivers and there's marshland all around it, and the boundary is relatively clear. It's a whole nother thing doing a consultation in a dense residential area when you have to try to work out the exact street lines that carve up the communities. And I think that's going to be very challenging. Everyone at the board last night recognised how difficult it's going to be to carve a line that distinguishes between Southbourne and Folkestone and Bournemouth that doesn't leave a lot of residents unhappy. I think we all recognise that's going to be a challenge. So my challenge to you is this. If you put out a consultation saying, would you like a Southbourne council? Plenty of people, presumably in Southbourne, will say, why not? You know, in the middle of Southbourne, why not? Let's go for it. I imagine there will be plenty of people who would not be in the Southbourne Council who would say, hang on, what about us? I've always been Southbourne all my life. I don't think that's where the border is. I don't want to be left out of doing Southbourne activities. I don't want to be left out of this new Southbourne body. So my question is, when the consultation comes, which group are you going to ignore? Are you going to ignore the people in Southbourne saying, yeah, let's go for it? Or are you going to ignore the people around the boundary who are saying, please don't do this, please don't leave us out, or please don't go ahead at all? So you're going to have to pick which community you're going to ignore. So my plea to you is this, is when it comes to looking at the consultations, if there isn't a conclusive boundary that is not going to be divisive and not going to leave a lot of residents unhappy, please can that be reason enough not to go ahead with the Southbourne Council? I think that's going to be a difficult one to address, but I would really like your commitment that listening to the views of the residents in the surrounding areas will be part of that consideration of a Southbourne Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Connolly. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I just want to give my backing to the removal of K from the recommendations, but I also understand that even with that removal, there will still be the conurbation-wide consultation. So there is this kind of element which was mentioned last night, which, for instance, if all the residents in my ward said within this consultation, oh, we want a parish council, then at a later date, it seems that that could be created, or that could go as a recommendation. So obviously, what Councillor Canavan has just said is really important about making sure that we still follow through on any of those recommendations and that each one of those is taken in turn, because just as Councillor Connolly's just said, you could be in a situation where lots of people, and again, I know this is kind of being mentioned as an outcome of the consultation, will be boundaries can be slightly redrawn around all the separate proposals. But it just feels like if there's all that piecemeal kind of response to individual pieces across the conurbation, then it starts to add up as something, across the whole of Bournemouth, because I think the other areas are more settled, then that starts to add up as well into being something that is complex and not wanted if everyone's sort of arguing between different areas, because ultimately there's no set outlook on what Bournemouth should be other than potentially is a whole Bournemouth. If that starts spreading everywhere, then it becomes, is our whole Bournemouth? Because it feels like the whole situation is a bit of a fait accompli from the point of view that if you put a proposal in November and that had to be a positive, it couldn't be a negative, so we couldn't just put forward something to say nothing in Bournemouth. Bournemouth's fine. There's all sorts of reasons why, Paul wants it for parity with Christchurch because of everything that happened in the run-up to 2019. But if you put in a proposal, it feels like that's now got legs. It's in a chain reaction almost, because last night there was lots of bits and pieces put, but it's kind of like, well, we're not going to do this now. If we took this now, then Richard would have to sit up all night redrawing, doing some mathematics in order to get something back for today. If we could do this, but it's going to go out to consultation anyway, then it's going to come here, come there. So it's kind of like, if you didn't put in a proposal back in November, then it's like there's not much more to say, because everything else is just now running away with itself.
Thank you very much, Councillor Martin. I'm just going to see if any other councillors wish to speak on this item who are not on Cabinet. I'm not seeing any indication. So I'm going to go back to Councillor Walters and then we'll move to Cabinet.
Cool. I just wanted to answer some of the questions about the process here. So the consultation will ask questions on each area and allow any respondent to comment on any or all of the proposals put forward. So anyone living around any parish council that has any concerns is going to be asked about it. We will plot all the responses geographically to refine the precise boundaries. So we will find out quite neatly where people think that they live. Similar to this, each area will be included as a separate section in the final recommendations, so we can have another discussion about each one. It will all go to full council for determination. I know that was a question that was asked there. We will be making consultation available through local hubs and libraries. We'll send a response to anyone, response form to anyone upon request. There will also be a leaflet drop to every single household in BCP, letting them know that this consultation is going on. So again, as I said last night, this consultation will have singularly the most publicity of any consultation, quite likely from the creation of BCP. There was a mention there of maybe doing this at a later date. Well, at a later date requires residents to put together a petition, which is a lot of work to request residents to do. It's not just, I believe, I can't remember exactly, Richard, what the percentage of people living in that area needs to sign that petition, but it's quite high. It's a lot of work. We can just ask them now how they feel about it. And that's what I recommend.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walters. Right, I can see that Councillor Cox is indicating. Go on, Mike.
Thanks, Leader. I just wanted to make a few points, really. First one, really, is to say a huge thank you to the leader of the work task group, the chairman of the task group, Ollie Walters, and also to Richard for the huge amount of work that has been done to put this report together. And to make it so reasonable, so understanding, that we can all have a debate about this today. I think we owe them a debt of gratitude. The first point I wanted to try and make was actually in terms of the services which BCP can provide. As a number of councillors have made clear, increasingly BCP can only really do statutory services. The amount that we have, flexibility that we have because of central government funding is minimal. And so the services which most residents expect us to do, like cutting the grass, like funding paddling pools, like, keeping libraries open, like whatever, then these are not affordable by BCP. And the only funding mechanism available for some of the services will be town and parish councils. And if we, in my opinion, if we actually dismiss these out of hand for political reasons, then I think you're doing the residents a huge disservice. The parish, as I know from experience, parish and town councils, they're not perfect. They have a lot of challenges, but actually they work. And actually, in terms of what we've got live examples in BCP with Christchurch, with Highcliffe, with Burton, with Herne, with Throop. These councils do work for local people, and if local people don't want to spend the money, which some of the money which was claimed to it was going to cost residents, then the voters can vote them out, and they can vote for minimal services if they want to, but at least it gives them the choice. And it's the voters that can make that decision. I'm really not surprised at all to see the Conservative opposition to this whole programme, but it's slightly strange. They are opposing local democracy, and I find that very, not very surprising really, but sad. Now, in actual fact, the Conservatives seem to actually have accepted the fact that we're going to have councils, parish and town councils in Christchurch. They didn't oppose that. They accepted it. They voted for it. So why do they vote for it in Christchurch and they vote against it in Poole and Bournemouth? I really don't understand it. And there was a lot of complaints last night about a small group of people making decisions on behalf of residents. I want to just put a big shout out really to a small group of Conservative councillors who made a decision in 2019 to make parish councils and town councils in Christchurch. I want to give them a big thank you because they did the residents a service by actually establishing these before BCP came about. And I think that's important. I kind of understand where the Conservatives are coming from politically, but I really don't understand where the Labour group are coming from. They seem to be flip-flopping, and it's in a remarkable way. And I don't understand how they seem to accept it for Poole, but they don't accept it for Bournemouth. And that just seems to be driven by the politics of the MPs, not necessarily what the residents want. So there was a. And I don't accept, I've got a huge amount of respect for Councillor Connolly, but I really don't understand or accept the logic that says that surrounding areas can somehow block the will of the residents in a particular area. I don't think that's right. I think if an area wants a town council, they should have it. So I don't really think that should exist. So I'm in favour of the recommendations as they stand. We should do a full consultation across the whole of BCP and see what residents want. And if they don't, as Councillor Walters said, if they don't want it, they can tell us they don't want it and we won't be taking it forward. So thank you very much for that, Leader. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Now, Councillor Hadley.
Excuse me. Thank you, Leader. Yes, Councillor Cox has said some of the things that I was going to say, and firstly, it was great thanks to Oliver and the group that looked at this. It was cross-party. I think they had a lot of meetings in a very short space of time and a lot of very active discussion. It was a bit sad that the Leader of the Opposition chose to leave the group because he didn't win a vote, but I think that's that was his choice. He explained that in an interesting way last night. Yeah, I think it is deeply political, but I think there is something about letting the people make a choice. And I'd echo what Councillor Cox just said. The devolution is something that is very much on the agenda for the present government. I think I know that the MP for Bournemouth East is really actively supporting us in terms of the play strategy and celebrating the work that we are doing locally. I'd really like him to get to be more positive about us asking the public what they really want. He is one of 400,000 people in the area. And I think the difficulty with saying no to Bournemouth because some of the councillors say no is that that disenfranchises the people of Bournemouth in terms of actually do they want improvements that we can no longer afford. And my mailbox is full because I'm responsible for a lot of the areas that are discretionary. My mailbox is full of people disliking the fact that we are not looking after facilities. I had one this morning about notice boards on a bit of open space and they were offering to clean them, and my response to that is brilliant, bring it on. I think there is something about working with our communities and being able to do that on a more local basis, which this brings. And this is one step in the process. It does enable us to go out and give people the choice to say, yes, we want it, no, we don't want it. The bit about borders is difficult in an urban area, but we're not asking people to erect fences and keep the neighbouring people out. It's about somebody being prepared to take those spaces on and love them better for everyone to use. And I know that part of the discussion last night was around particularly Boscombe Chine Gardens and whether that was in or out of the Boscombe area and the impact that might have people on the East Cliff. Yes, I can appreciate that's a problem, but as Councillor Cox said, I don't see why that should preclude the people of Boscombe from saying this is a part of our area, we love it, we want to look after it, we want to improve it for everybody, our residents in the neighbouring area and our visitors, which is really important and adds to what we can do as BCP. So I think giving people the option, giving them if people of Bournemouth overwhelmingly vote against a town council, then we've got our answer. But if we go to them saying, well, we're not going to give you a choice because the councillors feel that's not appropriate, when we are for the rest of the conurbation, I think that's really divisive and difficult. So I think I will be supporting the recommendation as carefully worked out by the working group, and with great thanks to Richard and the team for supporting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Leader. I've got a few points to make. I wanted to start off by addressing something that Councillor Canavan mentioned earlier on. and actually somebody else mentioned it last night. It's about the press release that went out, the comms that went out last week. And I'm glad to hear that Councillor Canavan, who I have a great deal of respect for, doesn't want to pick a fight with the media team. He doesn't need to, because Cabinet had a full involvement with that press release that went out last week. It reflected the view of Cabinet and the leader in terms of our view on community governance review. And so if Councillor Canavan wants to have a fight with anybody, please have it with me and Cabinet rather than the comms team. The second thing I wanted to say was to echo the comments of Mike and Andy about the great work of the Working Party under Councillor Walters, the great work of Richard, who I know from many years from Christchurch, and also I also wanted to thank Councillor Bartlett for a really great debate, a complicated debate last night. So thank you for a really good discussion of the issues. I wanted to pick up a couple of things that were mentioned last night by Councillor Broadhead, well, particularly one thing actually. So he said, and I quote, BCP is not very good at doing things, which I thought was a bit rich, considering that the reason, or one of the main reasons, that BCP has problems delivering things in the same way that every other local authority in the country has, is because of the old chestnut of 14 years of Tory austerity, underfunding, extra responsibility without the extra money. He didn't mention that. He didn't mention the damage done to BCP financially and reputationally in the 2.5 years of the Mellor Broadhead administration. Of course, he wouldn't mention that, but we know that's a significant, has been or was a significant issue, and it's taken 2 years under the leadership of the previous leader, now Millie, and Mike Cox, to get the council back to financial stability, and of course the officer team, Mr. Richards and Graham Farrant. So I thought that was a damn cheek, actually, to make that remark about BCP not being very good at doing things. The whole point about parish councils, and I will speak briefly about Highcliffe in a minute, is that we are filling gaps, and we will be increasingly filling gaps, because clearly local government finance problems are not going away. They will continue to come down the line at us, and this is, again, as Mike Cox mentioned earlier, this is one of the ways in which we can mitigate that constant crisis in local government financing, which is broken. Another point that I think was mentioned last night by Councillor Broadhead and others was residents don't want, this is, a precept is another tax. They don't want it. The more positive and helpful way of looking at a precept is that it's an investment in a community, an investment that wouldn't otherwise happen. So, and I know I mentioned this previously, but I'm going to mention it again. In the budget that Highcliffe has just set, we've got £100,000 put aside in a partnership agreement with BCP to redo our crumbling footpaths on the seafront, on the cliff top, which are vital. We're putting 70,000 into public toilets. We're putting 50,000 into the high street. We have taken on the nature reserve, the playing fields, other public open spaces. We are taking on the recreation ground, and we will be running those, and they will come off. That will come off the books of BCP, and that is the way forward. And that's, as I said, that's an investment, not a tax. It's a tax, but it's an investment in the community. And it will be interesting to see if people, the answer of people who don't support parish and town councils, where they think that investment will come from, and if they think it's going to come from BCP, they aren't recognising the financial reality of where local government is going. We're also funding arts festivals and food festivals. We are helping to fund the Coda Music and Arts Trust in Highcliffe and Walkford, which does work with Parkinson's patients, with special educational needs children, with our elderly population across the whole area. So I repeat, this is an investment, and it's and there's been a certain amount of shroud waving last night and in other forum about this extra tax on people. People are talking about 400, 500, 600 pound a year. What I've just talked about in Highcliffe as a model for that kind of thing is delivered on a precept of £30 per household put on a Band E property per year. So I just think that's worth putting all that in context, and I do hope that people who don't think that parish and town councils are useful don't start bleating when they can't have the things that are delivered in other areas like Christchurch, like Highcliffe, Burton and Herne. So I would like to fully support the recommendations and and move forward to public consultation and give the public their say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. To be honest, a lot of what I wanted to say has already been said by Councillor Martin and Councillor Hadley. However, I don't know whether it's a predisposition of Bournemouth councillors, but I do have a little bit of apprehension towards this, a bit of nervousness. I thought that my group leader, Councillor Northover, spoke really eloquently at the overview and scrutiny last night about her concerns around the Boscombe area, and around the Bournemouth town proposals. But that being said, I think it's really, really important that we put this out to the people and we allow them to have their say. That's why I think it's really, really vital that the consultation is done well. It feels like we're getting that assurance from the chair of the Task and Finish group that it will be, that it will be very considered, and that it will ask people for their opinions. But for me, I think it really does need to be done well, and we really do need to listen to it and take it on board and think about what people have said, because this is a big change potentially, but it's an important one as well potentially, because it's trying to find solutions to the problems we have. You know, why we're doing this, a lot of it is not just to give people a say over their area, is to be able to give them investment over their area, something that they've been lacking and something that they really want, and we've heard that. So I think Councillor Martin covered a lot of the points that were going to be said. I just want to as well kind of advocate for parish councils, because I've got one in my area. It's the only one in Bournemouth. But again, I think why that's been so successful is they've got a strong sense of identity, and it was from the bottom up. So that's why it's important that we listen to people when they come back after this consultation. So I'm really happy to support this with those kind of apprehensions and caveats that I've put out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Herritt.
Thank you, Leader. I'm going to add some thanks to all the officers and councillors involved in getting it to this stage. I understand there's some, I think, gruelling meetings, almost on a par with last night's marathon, but repeatedly. This recommendation from ONS feels like a bit of a robbery for my ward, to be honest. I went to the Wallasdown, Winton West and Ensbury Park area forum and asked them what they thought of that. And quite a strong feeling from that group was that they wanted to be part of some parish council arrangement, although they weren't quite sure what. I placed that submission at their request, and it was rejected as part of a northern Bournemouth council by the working group, so it didn't isolate Kinson, and then obviously became part of a wider Bournemouth town council. And now it's just out if this recommendation is followed. Now, I actually think that Redhill and Northbourne should be part of a wider area rather than just isolated, but that's probably not for now. It just felt a bit unjust for the ONS board to essentially remove that opportunity for my residents to have their say in a more positive way. We hear quite often that devolution is the best thing ever, but it now appears that devolution to the exact level that is determined elsewhere, and no more, no less, is the only solution. So if I were the residents of Redhill and Northbourne, I'd also be a bit worried that an opportunity to potentially share some of the burden of funding in some of those facilities is not fully explored by removing any option for the town council in Bournemouth. The paddling pool that we heard so much about at council last week, that is well loved from a wider area across Moordown, Wallasdown, Winton West. We had councillors from Kinson, Muscliffe, Winton East talk about how vital that facility is, and actually it's now in the south. It would now be in the southwest corner of a ward with a load of people flooding to it that wouldn't really be making a contribution and would be kind of likely funded. I can't predetermine that obviously, but I think the most viable solution for the Redhill paddling pool is likely to be a parish council. And it also feels like the recommendation kind of removes the opportunity for, say, Boscombe to reject their community council and become part of a wider Bournemouth council, or the same to happen in Redhill.
and feels like we're just kind of predetermining in the opposite direction to what we heard about earlier. So I think putting it to the public now, just as a wider possibility and seeing what we get back, is entirely the right move.
Thank you very much, Councillor Herritt. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, as one of the members of the working group, I really do want to express my appreciation to Councillor Walters for the way in which he took on the chair of the group and saw us through. It was a very tough gig. As one member of the working group said to me, and I won't say who it was, it must have seemed to him a bit like herding cats. So to have brought us to the point where there is a very clear set of recommendations, I think deserves some accolades. I would also like to express real appreciation to Richard Jones as the officer who guided us through the process. He was excellent at explaining the procedures, the limitations, etc., at providing very clear maps so that we could follow what was being suggested in the areas where not all of us know all of the BCP area back to front, and that was incredibly helpful. I thank you for all the calculations that he did in the background to work out potential ward sizes and numbers of councillors, and to make sure that that was being done in an appropriate way, and to bring those to us for consideration. Gratitude for that, and for preparing a very detailed report, which, as Councillor Cox has already said, is readable and clear and understandable. He's done an excellent job, so my appreciation to him for that. Thanks as well to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for the time they spent on it. I attended the meeting for that item, and I was very impressed with the level of the discussion and also with the ability of the chair to bring the meeting through to the conclusions that it did, one of which I don't actually share, but nevertheless, thank you to all those concerned. I agreed with some of what was said in that meeting. I disagreed with some of what was said in that meeting. You won't want me to refer to each and every agreement or disagreement. One area, though, where I did agree was with Councillor Connolly, with reference to the border between the proposed Southbourne Council and the proposed Boscombe and Folkestone Council. And I have to admit that although I am a ward councillor for Southbourne, West Southbourne being my ward, I have absolutely no idea where Southbourne begins and ends at that border. So she is absolutely right to raise the fact that there will be residents living in the area that is bordered by those two, who will feel they ought to be in one or the other, and we will find it impossible to make everyone happy. I'm not sure that I agree with her conclusion that that being the case, neither should happen. That, I think, brings things a stage too far. And I'm not sure that it necessarily would divide communities in the way that's suggested. I anticipate that if, and I say if, a Southbourne Council were to be created, it might want to further embellish the Christmas lights in Southbourne. I do not anticipate anyone saying to residents from across whatever the boundary might be, no, you can't look at those lights because you didn't contribute towards them. And equally, I anticipate that it might want to increase the offer at Fisherman's Walk on the bandstand in terms of music and other events during the better weather. And I don't anticipate anybody saying to anyone, do you actually live within the council area? If you don't, can you please leave? That's not the way in which community events work. Community events are arranged for those who wish to attend. So I don't see any parishing, whatever form, actually splitting communities in that way. I think they will enhance communities. One point that I really disagreed with last night was from Councillor Broadhead, where he said that it was overreach on the part of the working group to come up with proposals that were not submitted. And I was grateful to Mr. Jones, who corrected him at the meeting last night and highlighted that it was perfectly within the remit of the working group to make what sense as it could of the whole range of proposals and to come up with an alternative or alternatives if the working group felt that to be beneficial for the area as a whole. I believe that Councillor Broadhead was using his notion of overreach to try to say that the proposal for the rest of Bournemouth Council should not go ahead because no one had proposed that as such. And the answer is yes, the working group was perfectly entitled to make that proposal. There was no overreach involved in that. It was an attempt to rationalise the whole process. That said, he also had reservations about the process itself. I don't share the reservations he had, but I do have one major reservation about the process. And that is in no way a criticism of how Mr. Jones guided us through it. But the process, as he explained it to us, required us to make clear recommendations. Again and again in the meetings, members made suggestions that we would like to be able to say, if we were to do this, what do you think? Alternatively, if we were to do this, what do you think? Or which of these three would you prefer? And things of that sort, where we were not making specific recommendations, but where we were seeking to consult on possibilities. And sadly, Mr. Jones had to guide us to say, sorry, but that is not what you are allowed to do. Not by him, but by the rules of the game as laid down by the government. I think that's highly unfortunate. And I have to say that when it comes to the recommendations that the working group has put to Cabinet, I do not share every one as being the best possible outcome for each of those areas. That's my personal view. But the working group did have to come up with a set of recommendations as the only way to move through to consultation. And I support these as being the best recommendations that it could come up with, given all of the proposals and given all of the circumstances. I also disagreed with Councillor Broadhead where he suggested that members of the working group had come to the meeting with preconceptions as to what the outcome should be. And I've got to say that I have personally had no involvement with parish councils of any kind, in spite of the fact that I've been involved in local politics in one area or another for more decades than I care to remember. So I came to it with no preconceptions whatsoever. And I've learned a great deal in the process. And again, I'm grateful to Mr. Jones for a lot of that learning. I have become persuaded that parishes are a good thing. They do actually tie into one of my political philosophies, which is that decision making should be at the lowest level possible. And national government seems to share that view at the moment in terms of seeking to devolve some of its powers. Not necessarily in the best possible way, but that's what it's seeking to do. And I think to the extent that parishes enable local communities to make local decisions, that is a good thing. Councillor Martin has already exemplified some of the benefits that can be achieved through parishes. And he made use of, I thought, an excellent phrase when it came to precept in terms of investment in the community. I think that should be underlined. The opportunity for local decision making, the opportunity for parishes to decide what responsibilities they want to take on, I think should be open to all of our residents. And that is critically why I think the rest of the Bournemouth option should remain on the table. I don't think it's for councillors to remove options from residents at this stage. I think the options should be offered to residents and they should be entitled to express their views. And if you'll forgive me, I'll make one more point. And that is to agree with Councillors Canavan and Councillor Farquhar that the consultation exercise itself has got to allow residents to express preferences for one thing or another. Yes, the question will be, do you want this parish to be created? But the area where residents can respond indicating why they are expressing the view that they're expressing must encourage them to offer alternative views if that is what they wish to do. And yes, residents of Boscombe should be able to say, no, I'd much rather be part of a whole Bournemouth council, or no, I'd much rather not be part of a parish council at all. Equally residents of Southbourne, equally residents of Redhill and Northbourne, and all those other areas that are proposed, residents should be encouraged, and it should be made clear in the consultation that those views will be taken into consideration to express alternative arrangements if that is what they would wish to see. That said, I am reassured by Councillor Walter's comments as to how the consultation will run. Grateful to him for that, but I would like to support the recommendations as they come from the Working Party. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hannah. Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, first of all, I would say that it's not just Bournemouth, Councillor Wilson, who are nervous, because I'm nervous as well, you know, and I say I'm not Bournemouth. Well, actually, I'm 20% Bournemouth, actually, and 80% Poole, because of the way the boundaries, because it's hard, isn't it? It's difficult, so anything that's difficult to do makes you nervous, and drawing borders and boundaries also makes you nervous. Now, you know, I can talk about my ward. You know, there's parts of my ward where I will speak to somebody and say, you know, you live in Bear Wood, and they will go, no, I don't. I live in Bear Cross. It's because it's only one road away, and they don't see themselves part of that community. In my part of the ward, Merley, you know, everybody says they live in Wimborne. You know, they shop in Wimborne, they go to school in Wimborne, they use the Wimborne library. They don't see themselves as actually part of BCP. And I have other parts of the ward who say, no, we're Corfmullen, actually. Because I have some houses where actually to leave the house, you cannot leave the house going into BCP. You have to leave the house going into Dorset, into Corfmullen. So any boundaries are artificial. I totally agree. But one thing that I do know when I talk to members of my ward is that quite often they'll say to me, yeah, what I would like here is so-and-so, like they've got in Broadstone. And you go, yeah, okay, but it was a neighbourhood forum in Broadstone who organised that, and we don't have a neighbourhood forum, so when BCP can't do that for you. Oh, what about when we go down to Wimborne? Yeah, but Wimborne's got a town council, and it's a town council that does that, and BCP can't fund that. So not, if we go out to the consultation and people say, no, we don't want it, at least then you can say, well, that was your choice, wasn't it? What I wouldn't want to do is go to an area and say, oh, you know, those people over there are doing that now, and I'd like, and he said, yeah, but you know, we chose not to offer you the option of having a parish, so you can't do that. If a neighbourhood decides to turn it down, okay, that's their choice. You can say you can't do that because you don't have a parish, because that was your choice. Now, the boundaries, I do get the natural boundaries, and there's been a lot of discussion about where the boundaries should be. And letting communities choose their boundaries, but we do have one other thing that we should do, and I know we've discussed this at Cabinet on a number of occasions, is that natural boundaries don't always make a total balance, do they? The worst possible thing, and I'm going to say, okay, you've got a parish now, I want to see what that parish can do, yeah, but you can't afford it because you know you're not in an affluent parish, are you? So we've got to make sure that our parishes have a balance to them, so that they work, and so that we don't disadvantage one area and advantage another area just because all the big houses in that parish, they can do lots of nice things. So that is what we have to do, looking at our boundaries, and sometimes puts a slight artificialness on them to make that balance. So, you know, with all those things, and yes, coming back to what I said, it is hard, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about this, and there's going to be a lot of people who are going to misunderstand what it's about. But if we want to get improvements and allow neighbourhoods to have some of the things that we know we want, I think this is the only way we can do it now. So I'm in agreement with it.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I mean, just briefly, really, because I think most of the points I could have made have already been made. I think for me, this whole process, the staged process. It's good practice for local authorities to undertake these community governance reviews, and that's why we initiated it. The proposals have come forward from communities and been considered by the Task and Finish group. And we're now at the point where we want to have wide consultation to seek public views and comments on what's been put forward and what's drafted. I'm very open-minded about the creation of new town and community councils. I can see some of the difficulties with them, and boundaries have been mentioned, etc. But to me, it would just seem quite odd to remove an option at this stage and take that opportunity away from those communities to actually comment on that option, whether they agree, whether they disagree, whether they have other views or alternatives. So, yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable at all with sort of following the recommendation to withdraw the sort of proposed Bournemouth Town Council area from that consultation. So I'm quite content to support the draft recommendations unamended.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. So it was a really interesting debate last night at Overview and Scrutiny, and I want to thank the board for putting so much time and thought into it. It was very interesting to hear kind of conflicting views, and I think that this illustrates some of the issues around community governance reviews, and that it's not an easy process. And in fact, this is a legislative process. The government recommend we take a community governance review through our councils every sort of 15, 20 years. And I think, we don't want to shy away from the difficult questions we need to ask, especially in light of LGR and the fact that so many of us felt that we were ignored when it came to merging three very distinct communities. And although Christchurch took the initiative and created town and parish councils, Bournemouth and Poole were never even asked if they wanted that additional say within their communities at a parish, town or community level. And I think that's really scandalous, because we are now the only places across the whole of Dorset without that level of say. And for me, this is not about a precept. This is not about money at all. It's about residents being able to make meaningful decisions on the things that matter to them. And that's what I support. And that's why I would support this recommendation to at least ask the residents of Bournemouth if they wish to have a town or a parish council. I think that we're going to see this become quite an interesting debate, not just across BCP, but actually across the whole country, as we move to local government reorganisation with a minimum of 500,000 population. We will not be the largest town council, I can assure you, in the next 5 to 10 years. I just want to say thank you to the working group and to Councillor Walters for the immense amount of time and effort that's been put into considering the recommendations that came forward. I also agree with those recommendations, which is why I'm going to propose this paper. Can I see if we have a seconder? Thank you very much, Councillor Hannah, for seconding that one. And I think all that's left to ask really is if there is anyone in the room, basically see how we're going to vote on this as a cabinet. Can I see all those in agreement with taking these recommendations to council? Thank you very much. That is unanimous. And thank you, Councillor Walters. Okay, so we're going to move on to agenda item 7, which is the Q3 corporate performance report. I'm proposing this paper as it's part of my portfolio as leader. Can I ask if there is someone to second that one, please?
Yes, leader, happy to second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Right, so I don't want to spend too much time on this because we've been here an hour on the first item, and I think we need to be mindful of time. But the corporate performance report is basically every quarter we look at how we are performing as a council against those measures which are informed by the corporate strategy. This paper takes a look at those measures, and there are certain areas in there which you can see are performing really well and that we're making really good progress on. There are some which are being monitored at the moment, and I'm pleased that in this report we have no areas which are red rag rated and therefore need some intervention. So this report is for Cabinet to note. And I just want to see if there are any members from Overview and Scrutiny or any councillors who are not on Cabinet who wish to speak on this item before we move to Cabinet. I'm not seeing any indication. Are there any Cabinet members who wish to speak on this report? Go on then, Councillor Brown.
Just very briefly, thank you, leader. Just to comment on one which is sort of within my area, which I wanted to highlight about the increase in the percentage of physically active adults. That there's been a 4.2% increase since 2021-22. Actually, we're now quite a margin above the average for the rest of England. And I think you speak to people in public health, and the public health view is probably increasing physical activity. And physical activity and exercise is probably the key determinant of good health. If they wanted you to do one thing, they'd probably say if adults are more physically active, that has so many benefits right across physical and mental health and well-being. And it's actually one of those determinants in this report that it's not anybody's job to particularly say, oh, right, we need to do this to increase physical activity. So many of our policies feed into that, whether that's policies around active travel, whether it's our leisure centres, whether it's our sort of seafront services that we provide. So and parks and open spaces. So there's so many different policies right across the council that can impact this. And I think it's really good to see that measure improving, and it has immeasurable impacts on public health.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, leader. Yeah, it was just to mention a couple of things in my area. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about the reduction in the number of households in bed and breakfast over the last few months, but also just want to highlight the reduction in the number of people rough sleeping. I think we recently had our each year, MHCLG and do an official count, and we've seen a 3% reduction in our count from last year, which is really positive. It might not seem like a lot, but when the national trend is a rising homelessness, it is actually really positive. And we recently have our own bi-monthly counts, and that came back as the lowest figure in nearly 2 years. So really promising, and I think really good news. Just in terms of the overall monitoring, I did have some issues with it, which I've raised with Isla, and I'm hoping to see in the next report. So just wanted to highlight that again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Herrick.
Yeah, I'd just like to highlight the work of the economic development team in increasing the number of businesses in the area. They do quite a lot with not a lot in terms of networking, connecting businesses. And we obviously had a very recent fintech report that showed a booming kind of region I'd like to draw attention to. Also just like to flag that the footfall across the town centres is currently in this report as a kind of quarterly rather than a year-on-year report, which I'm hoping we'll be moving to by the time we see this again, because obviously that's a true reflection given that we operate in a very seasonal towns. in very seasonal towns. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Herritt. Any other Cabinet members wishing to speak on this one? Nope. So this report is for us to consider and note what's in the paper. Can I please see from Cabinet an indication that we agree to those recommendations? Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay, so we are going to move on to agenda item 8, which is in the agenda as a pay and reward progress update. It was originally hoped that we would be able to bring a report to Cabinet today. However, we're going to be delaying this to a future meeting at an agreed point in the pay and reward process. We put this on the agenda just in case we had something to report, and we didn't want to miss the opportunity to be able to report that formally to Cabinet, but there's nothing at this point which we want to share in this forum. However, we'll probably keep it as a potentially have it as an item next time, in the hope that we would have something to update councillors on. Councillor Hannah?
Just to say, Leader, that yes, of course, that is the position in terms of a report to Cabinet, but that does not mean that discussions have stopped and there's still negotiations taking place with unions to seek to resolve the situation. So we are hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hannah. Okay, so we're going to move on to agenda item 9, which is our place and environment and the local transport plan capital programme for 25 and 26. Councillor Hadley is going to be proposing this report. Can I see if we've got someone to second? Thank you very much, Councillor Herritt. Over to you, Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, this is a report that Cabinet needs to review every year about this time and recommend to Council. We get a block amount of money from government to spend on our travel priorities, which is the main piece of this report, and 70% of that goes on maintenance, 30% on trying to improve the network. Any additional monies to that historically have been around bidding for grants and trying to get additional money, and the report also shows some of the detail of those bids that we've been successful in getting. I think the message we're getting from government is that potentially will change in the future. It'll become more based on allocations based on population or length of the network and those sorts of things. But that's for the future. So this is based on our local transport plan 3, which is a 15-year plan, and we're just in the process of developing our local transport plan 4 right now. But the recommendation is to recommend to council that we go forward as laid out in the appendix to this report, with the spend on the LDP monies, which is £10.58 million in capital. We have got an allocation been made to us very recently from the Active Travel Grant, round 5, which is about 1.4 million, and there will be a paper on the schemes that we'd hope to support on that. The Active Travel team are working very hard at the moment on a very tight timeline to go back to Department for Transport in terms of our proposed spend, and looking at prioritising particularly walking and cycling challenges across the network, and I think most of that seems to be around junctions at the moment that are of particular concern, but that will be coming back. And also we have to lay out a 3-year plan for the indicative highways maintenance. So that's the third part of this recommendation is how we plan to go forwards with the highways maintenance. That's important in terms of longer term planning. And again, central government have indicated they're looking at multi-year settlements in the future, and that will be really helpful in terms of planning our work. There was a question at full council regarding maintenance of a couple of roads, and an opportunity there perhaps to highlight the challenges we have, that we do look at every road on a regular rolling basis and try and prioritise the ones that are most in need of care. There was a question a statement from a member of the public at the start of the meeting regarding the Active Travel Fund, and I think both Councillor Herritt and I did attend the Barrett by bus. It's been going for 3 years, entirely volunteer effort, and the irony of it is they can't they can't actually cycle the kids on Barrett Road because it's so dangerous. So they pick their way through the back streets, and that was really interesting to actually go and experience that. But there is work. Certainly, the Christchurch Junior and Infant School is one of the candidates for improvements, and we're looking to consult with residents in that area and parents of the school about what measures they might need, which could include a response to the statement that was made earlier. I think that's probably enough of a summary for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. Can I ask if any councillors who are not on Cabinet wish to speak on this item? I'm not seeing any indication, so let's go to Cabinet. Councillor Herrick.
Yeah, just briefly, there's not much to add to what Councillor Hadley said, but from a rotation perspective, it's great that we're able to continue investment in this area in an increasingly pressured financial situation. The costs of crossing installations in particular have risen in line with the construction inflation that's affecting viability pretty much every time anyone thinks about anything involving concrete or tarmac, which inhibits our ability to roll out more and faster. I'm sure every ward councillor can think of several sites in their ward that would benefit their residents and the safety of all road users. We do therefore take a data-led approach on these, but it does feel a little kind of frustrating, I think, as any councillor, that you're kind of waiting for something to happen to justify a future crossing that everyone can kind of see is coming. But such is funding life in local government at the moment. And just finally, that the school streets provide a really welcome opportunity to improve safety, particularly around school times. And as mentioned, the Christchurch Junior and Infant School should be ready to go out to consultation soon, and hopefully provide a much safer environment there. It's one that's been kind of repeatedly lobbied for from a multitude of councillors and local residents there.
Thank you, Councillor Herrick. Any other councillors wishing to speak? Go on then, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, just to speak overall on this, I mean, it's a lot of money, but I think it's really critically important. You know, probably the number of comments I get from residents, the number one thing is always about highways, road condition, road works, those sorts of things. Just in terms of highway maintenance, it's really important that we keep on top of our road repairs and surfacing and potholes, obviously, for motorists, for buses, for cyclists. And I really want to thank all of our highways engineers and all of our maintenance teams for what they do, because to be frank, and I go to other parts of the country, this area is pretty good, I think, in terms of road condition. I can't think in my ward of the roads I go down, I don't often see a pothole, and when I do, I report it in, and it tends to get fixed fairly swiftly. And I've actually seen in recent years some quite major road maintenance improvements. Just outside my ward, Turbury Park Avenue, which was, to be frank, was one of the worst roads that I used to go along with, which was peppered with potholes, has been totally resurfaced for the full length. That's a major piece of work. And now we don't have the pothole issues down there. Camford Magna, that's been resurfaced with government funding, and that was a problematic sort of road surface that was breaking up. Lots of the streets around Bear Cross have been done in recent years, which under the old Bournemouth Borough Council were patched beyond recognition. They were in such a state, and they were a different type of road, a sort of concrete based road, and our sort of highways teams have actually used a different technology and actually really worked really well to actually resurface. I think it's probably about 11 or 12 streets around the Bear Cross area which hadn't been done for decades. So I think actually we should be quite proud of there's always going to be more to do, and there's always going to be people who can point to a crack or a broken surface or a pothole and damage to a vehicle, but I think actually in the context of our financial position, I think we should be really proud of the work that we do in terms of highway maintenance and the condition of our roads. And we just need to keep a watching eye on it and keep pushing the money in and keep making the repairs that we need to. That's on the highways maintenance side. On the integrated transport block side of things and the active travel funding, I am pleased to see that there are funds going into active travel, and for me the continuing funding of this is about improving options for people, and it's about behaviour change. And we're not sort of telling people you've got to leave your car and get a bike now. Personally, I have shifted my modes of transport in the last 4, 5, 6 years since BCP's come in. Before that, I'd have probably described myself as a motorist. I always got in my car to go wherever I needed to go, but there's been several key things for me that have made a difference to my sort of travelling behaviour, and that was first in 2019 that the Beryl scheme came in, and for the first time in decades I got back on a bike and started using them regularly. I've done the Beryl Scoot Happy course to use e-scooters. The bus services have improved, which we'll be coming on to later, and actually now if I have a meeting in Poole, I do look at the times and think, actually, can I get the bus down into Poole rather than take my car? My car sits on the driveway now for days on end because I'm using different modes of transport to get to where I need to get to. And you know, the active travel corridors are now regularly cycling to the civic centre because the Wallisdown Road's been done and you've got good cycle routes along there. Glenfurniss Road's been done and you've got the bridges there. And as having seen that, driving through those routes, and I'm starting to think, actually, now I can cycle this because my options have been broadened. So I'm doing that a lot more. So I think it's really, this investment, the continuing investment, is about broadening those options for people and actually encouraging people to think about how they're going to travel rather than just default, I'll get in my car and I'll do that route. Can you actually cycle? Can you actually walk that route? Do you need your car today? Is there a bus route? And for me, you know, it's actually, you know, to make me change my behaviours, somebody's doing something right somewhere along the lines because I'm pretty much a creature of habit. So, so yeah, I welcome the continued funding of those.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Any other members wishing to say anything? Andy, do you want to add anything?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, it would be remiss of me not to mention the Transport Advisory Group met on the 26th of February. I should have said that at the start. And so we had a chance to go through this report in some detail in advance of Cabinet. There were some issues they raised with us. It's an appendix to this paper. Part of that was about highways maintenance, and as Councillor Brown's put very well, I think our team are quite innovative in trying to look at ways to reduce the cost and increase the coverage, and particularly some of the spraying of surfaces before they get too bad allows sealing of the surface, which stops the frost getting in, which stops the road breaking up. So some of the preventative work working early allows them to cover much more ground more cheaply. People complain about potholes. My immediate response to that is, have you reported it? Because if you don't report it, we don't know about it and we can't fix it. And if you do report it, actually the team, in my experience, get on with it pretty quickly and are on top of it. So you know, the key thing there is, don't complain about a pothole unless you've reported it. And if you've reported it and it hasn't been fixed, then certainly I would want to know and try and help it along. I think, you know, I'd also like to raise a thanks to government for you know, we have had additional money to support us on pothole repair, and I think we've put that to good use, and I hope that will continue, because it's you know, when we go out to the public in terms of the issues that are important to them, what the council does, maintenance of the roads is right up there in terms of the things that people feel is something the council needs to do and perhaps, you know, could do better. And then in terms of the capital schemes, and it's in this report, but as I say, it's not part of the recommendation to council because it is coming in from elsewhere. We have been successful in getting money to do quite a few of the transformational things that Councillor Brown highlighted, and I hope that will continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. So this is, the recommendation is for us as Cabinet to recommend to Council, as set out in the recommendations set out in the paper. Can I ask for an indication from Cabinet? Are we happy to do that? Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay, so let's move on to agenda item 10, which is the Strategic Community Infrastructure Levy. This paper is one that I'm going to be proposing. Can I see if there is someone to second, please?
Happy to second it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. Bear with me one moment. I just need to find my notes from yesterday. So community infrastructure levy is money that is collected from development and used to fund the infrastructure that's necessary to support planned growth as set out in the draft BCP local plan and also in the development plans that precede that draft. Those receipts are split into strategic, neighbourhood and administration components. And this paper really focuses on the strategic community infrastructure levy and how it is spent by BCP Council. It really came from us identifying that we weren't being strategic with strategic SIL, and that there was growing pressures within our mitigation strategies that would prevent future development, particularly across Poole, but also affecting areas of Bournemouth too. And that is a very real risk, considering that Christchurch has currently got no development taking place because of the issues around nutrient mitigation that haven't been solved just yet. So we don't want to be in that position with Bournemouth and Poole and not be able to firstly deliver any homes, but also not develop anything at all, which will impact pretty much everyone who relies on a level of building or infrastructure locally. To try and work out how we best prioritise, we put out a call to various service areas across the council. In fact, between service areas, we identified £121.8 million worth of project funding that needs to be done at some point over the next 5 years. And considering our uncommitted strategic SIL pot is 29.3 million, we won't be able to cover everything. In fact, we'll only be able to cover a small proportion of that. So we need to be really strategic and really consider the priorities. The paper has 4 options on how we would consider that allocation, and the preferred approach is option 2, which would put approximately 80% of our strategic SIL towards those large infrastructure projects which are essential to supporting growth in our support local development and growth. The provision of Poole Town Centre flood defences and the habitat site mitigations are critical to allow us to continue granting planning permission. And we've also put forward education in Bearwood and Merley and providing additional education provision for development that's currently underway in the area, and also an allocation for strategic transport to deliver essential maintenance. This leaves about 18% for discretionary spend, but the reflections from overview and scrutiny last night was that we still need governance around that amount, and I would absolutely agree with that. My view is that from a decision-making body, whether that's Capital Briefing Board or Cabinet, we need to have a set of principles that define what we can spend that money on to avoid situations we've had in the past where they've been spent on projects like, barbecues on the beach, and make sure that they align with the corporate strategy and that they are also in line with the local plan. So I'm going to invite members who are not on Cabinet if they would like to speak on this item. In fact, I'm going to first go to Councillor Bartlett as Chair and Overview and Scrutiny, and then Councillor Canavan will come to you.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I think your comments really reflected much of what was discussed last night, so I'll be very brief. What I would say, it was a very good paper, and it's the first time that I've seen the SIL requirements set out in the way that it was, and it's fascinating to see just how many projects have been identified and how much it's going to cost and how much little we've actually got to spend on them. So I mean, that's a massive gap there, isn't there? I think that possibly we could review the list again, because there may be areas that members in particular may have thoughts on which they've not been asked for their views on, but I think you touched on that when you talked about the governance requirement. So yeah, a really good paper, very well received, and the Overview Scrutiny Board agreed to support the recommendations as set out to the report. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bartlett. I'm going to invite Councillor Canavan to come and speak.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't originally intending to speak on this, but I just wanted to follow up on what Councillor Bartlett has just said. So I think there are two things that came out of the overview and scrutiny meeting last night. There was, I think, pretty much unanimous support for the option that's in this paper, and I support that too, for what that's worth. I think it's probably the most realistic of them. But one of the things that came up last night was the degree to which we'd looked at option 4, which was, of course, partially covered by some of the things that you've already outlined in terms of work that's already ongoing, but also the key thing was the funding for phase 2 of the PLAYE strategy. So without that, putting it bluntly, we do not have any commitment to funding phase 2 of the PLAYE strategy. Now, there will be people that we both know that will help us, I'm sure, try and leverage some money out of the government to support that. But I think it's important that the public are aware that as it stands at the moment, there is no funding for that next stage of the PLAYE strategy. It is an important piece of work and we completely support it, but it is important that we finish it. So whatever we can do to try and find the additional money, obviously that's got to be something we try for. But the other thing is the issue about governance, which you raised last night, in term and which Councillor Bartlett has referred to. I think the governance of this and the scrutiny of this needs to be more than what I thought you were suggesting last night, which is basically some kind of annual report. I think we need to look at it a little bit more closely, and I'm not quite sure how, but I don't think an annual report to review how we're looking at SIL, what we're spending on, how much it's costing, what we're doing with that money is enough. We do not want to, I'm sure, repeat the mistakes that we have previously made in the past in terms of control and oversight of that kind of expenditure. So I'm just really asking, I guess, whether we can do something more than just an annual review. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Canavan. I'm just going to see if there's anyone else indicating to speak on this item. So we'll come to Cabinet, and I'll just start to respond to some of those points. And as I said in my opening, the reason why this has come to scrutiny and then to Cabinet is because I felt there was a real deficit in the governance across the whole council. And I would be delighted if whether it's Overview and Scrutiny Board or whether it's Place and Environment, if one of the other Overview and Scrutiny committees would like to have a look at this in more depth. I'd be very keen to come along and explain it in more detail and maybe dive into some of the governance around it as well to make sure that it's it meets the principles that we want and that strategic SIL should be being used to deliver. And I guess the other place that it could go is audit and governance. So I'm very happy to raise with those chairs and see if there's a way in which they would like to look at it in a little bit more detail. Right, so coming to Cabinet, I can see Councillor Hadley has indicated.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I think this is a really important piece of work, and as Councillor Bartlett said, the long list is frightening. The more frightening thing is that was a cut down list from an even longer list of priorities that were identified, and I think that it would be really interesting actually to step back from that, because that is where investment has been identified as by a lot of the officers, and there's also what do we strategically want for the longer term for our three towns. And so there's a higher area of that. I think the other bit is that all of those are candidates for SIL, but they may be candidates for funding in other ways, and that partly depends on what comes through devolution, what opportunities come from bids to government, what comes from opportunities for people to sponsor a work, and so I think there is a degree to which it needs to be a living list, and it needs to identify and make sure that we know what we do want and have some idea about which the priorities are, so that when the opportunities arise, we can grab them. And I think it's something that when I reflect the work that I do with the flooding and coastal team and also with the transport team, they've been really good at being ahead of the curve in terms of some of those external grant opportunities by knowing what we want, by having done some preparatory work and getting to a point where inevitably when there's a call for bids, there's never enough time to actually develop the proposal from scratch. You need to have stuff that you know is going to come forward. So I think that long list actually has a second purpose, and it is around, well, actually, what are the things that we would love to do if there's money that comes in from other sources, because we just haven't got enough for it. And I think it's also what people expect. You know, they want better roads, they want other ways in which we do stuff. Actually, you know, we can't, and the money doesn't fall out of the sky. And I think that ties to what Councillor Canavan said, and in Councillor Moore's absence, obviously the two of us worked on the strategy for play, and that was celebrated by one of our local MPs, and I was grateful that he mentioned the officers involved in that in the House of Parliament. I think that was a really nice thing. We know exactly what we need in terms of play across all of our play sites. We have a very clear plan for that. I was very nervous about not having the funding for phase 2, because I think, you know, we've already created an expectation amongst the public, but we have identified the things that really need to be done in phase 1, and we took actually a brave decision, which I think partly led to this paper, in saying we would devote quite a lot of money to phase 1 to play rather than all these other things. You know, and that's the challenge. You know, do we need to keep the cliffs up? Absolutely do. Do we need to develop other things than just play? Of course we do. So I think, you know, that we need to try and work on exactly what is the right route to funding phase 2. But I'm committed to trying to do that. But it probably isn't still, because you know, there's some significant things, for example, around in my ward on the west, the West Keys, around the flood defences, where we've managed to get a significant amount of money from the Environment Agency, and they have increased that on the basis of inflation since we first put our bid in. But we need to show commitment as a council to that as well, and that's why that sits under option 2 as one of the key areas. And the maintenance of our 2 bridges and pool is another part of that, which is a really important area. So I'm really pleased that we have actually surfaced this, because it felt like it was a secret committee under the previous administration in terms of how this money got spent. And I think, you know, we need to have an adult discussion amongst all councillors and understand what we're spending and how we come to the priorities, and if not agree, it certainly get to a democratic place in terms of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Burton.
Oh, thank you, Leader. I mean, first off, I would echo what you said. It's really nice to see some strategy in the strategic SIL fund, because my feeling is that previously, in the previous administration, it was quite a secret fund. It was used to do lots of little projects. You know, I watched, because I used to sit on the neighbourhood SIL panel, and often things, oh, we don't have enough of the neighbourhood SIL. I know, let's send it off to the strategic SIL and see if they can fund it. So there was little strategy there. So this is really good to see. I am also particularly pleased to see the bit on education. I'm going to have my ward councillor's hat on here and my portfolio hat on, sort of one after the other. Just so people understand, you know, we have 2 very large housing developments in Bearwood and Merley, following on behind another housing development which has been finished over the last few years. So we have a lot of possible quite an increase in number of children. I say possible because it's always very difficult to predict when the houses aren't actually occupied yet. We have falling roles for young children. So to a certain extent, what could have happened here is you could have said, look, we'll just allow those spare places to fill up with the children, and then as we get more children, we'll send them off to various schools to travel to school, and save that money. However, of course, that would mean that we'll get lots of young children not being educated in their community, which I personally think is really important. Secondly, of course, it will add a lot of pressure on the roads, and we have an area where we have a lot of problem with the amount of traffic on roads, and it's particularly difficult at school drop-off and school pick-up time, and therefore more children, young people, or particularly children, because we don't have schools for older children in Bearwood and Merley, but particularly for the young children who can actually get to school by walking, or very short journeys by car, and stay within the area rather than driving out. Plus the advantage that, you know, they're being educated with their peers. They can, you know, play and socialise with their peers out of school time. So therefore, I think that's money really well invested.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burton. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Just very quickly, obviously very much welcome this report, its clarity and its transparency. It's a big step forward to where we were. It would be remiss of me if I didn't go back to something I mentioned earlier on, which was the investment in the cliffs, and obviously Councillor Hadley mentioned cliffs earlier on. The cliff paths that on the cliffhanger at Highcliffe. So the parish council is using £100,000 of neighbourhood seal and other money to put this project together, in partnership with BCP, who we are providing hopefully the other half of the money. About 30 grand has already been spent on consultants and the environmental work and the drainage work, etc. So it was kind of just a little bit of a reminder, to a little voice from the other end of the conurbation saying, you know, don't forget the £75,000 we need from BCP to complete this project. And a lot of officer time has gone into this, for which I'm incredibly grateful. So yeah, just to mention that I will need to come back to the Capital Briefing Board to get the last bit of the money, but from hopefully from the strategic seal pot. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Herritt.
Just as again, and I'm not someone who likes to repeat my colleagues' words, but you know, it is a much needed step forward, and one that does bring some of these items right into the light. And starting to look at things strategically. Phase 2 of plan to play. I must admit, I'm a bit concerned as a ward councillor whose play area is in phase 2. And I would agree that it's imperative that we find a way to fund that, and it's not something we will be letting go. As the flip side to that, though, given the amount that we're having to spend on future development, it would be good to perhaps see the government contribute some additional funding there to enable that, rather than us spend strategic SIL to do it, to hit those housing targets that are coming down the line. There's obviously a lot in the paper about future development, but I do have a bit of a concern, and I'm going to talk about cliffs because that seems to be the theme of the day, and it's definitely one of mine. But we've not really talked about how we could protect some of our current homes and businesses. The emphasis on strategic SIL here is about future development, mitigating, improving, maintaining and adding facilities. But what's not really provided for at this point is probably mitigating against development that happened 70 or 80 years ago, where failing to protect some homes and businesses will create issues in the longer term. And cliff stability and slips is one of my pet topics. I took it to ONS last week as a topic for them to explore in the future. But in the longer term, we know much more work is going to be needed to deal with those cliffs, protect homes and the cliffs and businesses from further erosion. We only need to look along the sea to Barton and just over the border in Hampshire, as well as West Bay, which is quite frankly frightening if you see how close people will get to the cliff slips over there. Poole Bay is, as we regularly talk about, is amazing. It's unique in its challenges. The cliffs don't have big roads underneath, which helps protect them. Sand has been piled onto the beach at great expense. It's created us a great resort, but it's there to protect the cliffs, not do that. But they're essentially now under attack from above in water, freeze-thaw, exposure to the elements, and that creates issues for what's in front of them and the problems we're seeing with slips, which is a community facility as much as it is our seafront. But yeah, the communities that live above them as well, we need some work on. So as with the flood protection in Poole Town, we're probably going to need some help from the Environment Agency, but I'd expect we're going to need to contribute as well. I don't think there's a need for immediate alarm. I don't want everyone to rush out and panic, but I do think it's something that we need to really consider in the future.
Thank you very much, Councillor Herritt. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, a couple of points I wanted to sort of comment on, but I think I agree with colleagues that this is a really good report to have in terms of the strategic use of our community infrastructure levy. And infrastructure to cope with the impact of developments is just really so important. I think often when things come to planning committee and you speak to residents about proposals and planning applications, you know, we've had 3 very major housing developments in our ward that have been approved. One's been built out, the other 2 are progressing. That's going to deliver about 1,700 new homes, 650 of which will be affordable homes under the sort of 40% rule, which is being fulfilled. But so many of the comments are, well, okay, you have all these houses. What about the doctor's surgeries? What about the schools? What about the roads? You know, well, there's not a school in this development. There's not a doctor's surgery. Well, there isn't. But, and this makes clear, there is lots of money being put forward by those developers in various ways, Section 106 and through Community Infrastructure Levy, that will fund the provision for those new developments. And it's really important that we progress with that. And I think actually, if you go around some of these new developments, the Camphor Paddock development, which is 371 houses, you go around and speak to people in that area. So many of them have little children. You know, I've spent times there knocking on doors, and door after door after door after door, young families with young children. So we're going to have a lot more young families in the area when all these houses are built, and it's really important that we make progress with the schools development. So obviously this report details, and I think it's worth repeating, that the developers have already agreed £7.6 million of Section 106 funding towards education provision, and we're adding 4.2 million from the Community Infrastructure Levy that's coming from those developers of those houses as well, to make £11 million to improve the education provision to mitigate the impact of those developments. The other area I wanted to comment on is the Poole Town Centre flood defence, and for a different reason, because it said it's needed to enable Poole Town Centre regeneration. Now, I've been a councillor in Poole for 18 years, and I remember even before I got elected, back in the early 2000s, seeing artists' impressions about what Poole waterfront was going to look like along Poole Quay and round where all the way up to sort of to Hunger Hill. Very European sort of waterfront walkways with cafes and terraces, and it looked great. And I think some of actually my colleagues who were Lib Dem councillors, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, would actually be quite pleased. I went into Poole Town Centre the other day, and the development by the Twin Sails Bridge has really progressed. You know, there's a major development going on there, and I think this then helps that, because this is going to help with the flood defences and provide some of that waterfront. And I think those sorts of fairly visionary councillors from 30, 40 years ago who wanted to see that sort of waterfront provision would finally be quite pleased to see some of this investment really going in and delivering parts of that. And I suspect it'll be some time before we see what those artists' impressions showed 20, 30 years ago. But actually, it's nice to see that parts of it are happening, and it's really sort of, you know, you can really tangibly see that. So, and I think once that's finished, who knows, it could be another 5, 10, 20 years before it's all finished. But I'm looking forward in my retirement to walking along the waterfront in Poole. So yeah, I think this is really good to have these sorts of sums in there, and it's important again that it's £7.7 million of still cost towards the Poole Town Centre flood defence, but that secures another 22 million from the Environment Agency towards that work. So we are really we're getting the Community Infrastructure Levy funds from these developments, but we're really leveraging that to actually really make major tangible changes to those communities. So yeah, I very much welcome the report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Any other councillors on Cabinet wishing to speak? No, just to briefly sum up, and I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Brown. This is about supporting our planning and regeneration ambitions, which is delivering homes and regenerating our town centres, and particularly for Poole, where the flood defences are going to be essential for any future development. We are not going to be able to attract investment. We're not going to be able to attract businesses. They don't have the certainty of that long-term development opportunity. So I think that this is a really, really important almost bit of communication from us as an administration that we are keen to develop. And if we want to, you know, stay true to what the draft local plan sets out, then we need to provide the means in which to do that, and this does. However, you know, we've still got nearly £100 million worth of projects that will not be funded, and really I think it's a positive thing we have that list, because it gives us some real clarity on where we need to be looking for external funding, whether that is from government, whether it's from investment opportunities, private enterprise, or even within some of our own joint ventures. It tells us what is necessary there, and I'd really welcome all councillors having a look at what may be missing from that list. And I think Councillor Hadley's right. It will be a living document and one that we need to revisit, because we need to keep an eye on the risk factors involved, and not just the risk to development, but the risk to our communities that are part of those projects. Okay, so I'm going to take a vote from Cabinet on this one. Can I see all those in favour of the recommendations? Thank you. That is unanimous. Right, before we move on to agenda item 11, I think we've been going for very nearly 2 hours, so we'll take a 10-15 minute break and come back at a little after 12:15. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to this March meeting of Cabinet. Apologies for a bit of an adjournment there. We're going to move on to agenda item 11 of the agenda. In fact, I am just going to slightly delay looking at agenda item 11, and that's because of some of the issues that were raised at overview and scrutiny last night. We're still checking some of those questions. I think that's the nature of having overview and scrutiny the night before a cabinet meeting. It means we've got the next morning we have to do a lot of work to incorporate those recommendations and have a look at the consequences of those. So I'm going to move that further down the agenda, and instead we're going to go on to agenda item 12, which is the Bus Services Improvement Plan. Councillor Hadley, I understand you're going to be proposing this. Can I see if there is someone to second that one? Thank you very much, Councillor Herritt. Over to you, Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, so that there are three recommendations to Cabinet on this. We have been successful in being awarded £5.7 million from the Department of Transport for our bus service improvement plan. We had to refresh that at fairly short notice a couple of months ago, and I think I was talking to a councillor from Dorset who was bemoaning that they'd got less money than us, so we've been successful in terms of our bid. So the first one is that we recommend to Council that we accept the BCP, Bus Service Improvement Plan, which is about improving our services in partnership with all of the bus operators, which is mostly more bus in our area. There are small bus operators as well who are part of the BCP process. The second one is effectively delegating the delivery of the programme to the Service Director for Planning and Transport in consultation with myself as the portfolio holder for climate mitigation, energy and environment. We had quite a significant discussion around the BCP programme at the Transport Advisory Group as well, which I'll talk about a little bit. And then the third recommendation is to recommend to Council a full review of all our subsidised local bus service contracts ahead of the planned commencement of the withdrawal of the bus subsidy budgets. So this is where our revenue budget it's one of the areas where we are having to draw our horns in. We've talked about that in a number of other areas. Our BCP does provide us an opportunity to continue some of our subsidies, but in discussions with the Department of Transport, we need to be really careful about ensuring that we are putting the money into the right services and into supporting those services that really need it, and where a service could be commercial, that we have a robust discussion with the bus operator about moving those things to commercial operation, or that we agree that it's not viable to run the service at all and withdraw the service. So it's not just about cutting services, but it is about having a solid review of where is our money being spent, is it the right place, should we be modifying that going forwards, and it's something we should be doing we do on an ongoing basis, but it's time now to have a full review. So that's the purpose of that recommendation C. In terms of the Transport Advisory Group meeting, the area that they covered, and literally again it was very quickly after the last full council meeting. So one of the areas that was of concern to councillors was the issue around mobile phones and children, and the impacts of bullying and other issues that young people with smartphones might have. And we had previously been successful in persuading the bus company to accept a reduced fare for children for term time travel to school, particularly if they used the bus app. Well, you need to have a smartphone to be able to use the bus app. So the recommendation from TAG was around, is there a way that we could give the children a discount on travel to school without having to use an app? And absolutely accept this ties to that's resolution that was in full council. We did have an opportunity because we had a BCP meeting immediately following the Transport Advisory Group meeting, so we've raised it with the bus company already. We haven't yet got to an answer. That was.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. I want to invite councillors who are not on Cabinet to speak on this item if they would like to indicate now. I'm not seeing any indication. Right, so over to Cabinet. Councillor Herritt.
Just a quick one, really. I don't really have much to add, other than that we know the impact of buses and connectivity on communities and how vital they are. It's also a note that our local bus services are bucking national trends, and more buses as a partner are vital to the continued improvement of those services. I think, like probably quite a lot of other councillors, worry about future funding. Making bus travel a cheap and reliable solution is vital to alleviating congestion, making roads safer, reducing emissions and carbon impact of travel. Furthermore, with an ageing population, especially in our area, the better we make bus services and the more pensioners that become eligible, it can actually create further pressure on budgets as we fund the bus passes locally from services. And I think that's just a couple of things to note on that, really. But obviously, a welcome funding, and hopefully we can kind of find our way through.
Thank you very much, Councillor Herritt. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, just a couple of comments on this. And as I've been trying to, as I mentioned earlier, shift my transport modes, I've taken a lot more interest in bus routes and bus frequency, etc. And I think it's useful here to look back a bit over what's been done with the funding from the BCP since 2022 to up to now. And some of the successes there, because if you read through in the appendix, I was really impressed with, the bus service 18 frequency enhancement, and has generated 265,000 additional passengers so far. You know, that's phenomenal. Another 250,000 bus journeys, because we've actually made that investment to improve the frequency of the 18 service. And one I was particularly pleased to note, and I've mentioned it to colleagues, was that certainly myself and Councillor Burton actually had a meeting with Moorbus, probably a couple of years ago now. We talked around a lot of the sort of bus frequency and issues within our ward, within Bearwood and Merley, and I was really pleased to see that one of the things that's been delivered is to align the Moorbus ticketing zone A with the BCP Council area boundary. So obviously when BCP was created, the area of Merley and Highcliffe were in zone B. So I once got a bus from Bearwood to Merley. It was only half a dozen stops up the road, and it cost me a phenomenal amount because I crossed from zone A to zone B. And now they've removed that and aligned all of BCP. So everybody in BCP is in zone A, and if you're travelling within our conurbation, you're not going to be financially penalised by crossing artificial zones. So I was really pleased to see that. And then looking forward to the delivery plan for 25-26, I'm interested to see, where we were talking earlier about the impacts of development, and the bus companies are obviously aware of this and working on it and looking at frequency enhancement and possible new Route 11 to adjust the 6 and 6A service to support new housing developments like Camford Paddock, just off Magna Road in my ward, near to where I live. So yeah, I think we can underplay this sometimes. There's a lot of really good stuff that's gone on that people don't really notice about, maybe bus service priority routes and, you know, changes to junctions and that sort of thing. And the proposals that are coming forward for the future really do step by step sort of make a difference and help people to make use of our bus services. And I think we've got a lot of success there that we should be proud of.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say I obviously really welcome this. However, I try to avoid bringing ward issues to Cabinet, but something that's been on the agenda for my ward, and whenever I go to an area forum since when I first got elected back in 2018 to our last area forum in 2025 a few weeks ago, is the possibility of a very small service to Throop, a bus service. It's something that elderly residents are really always pushing for, and so in terms of a full review of the services proposed during 25-26, with the following objectives, I think just potentially maybe new routes, small new routes that have social value would be really useful. I appreciate it might not be viable, but I think just with this extra funding, I think it would be worth exploring. We have over those 7 years really tried to explore this. I've had meetings with the yellow buses when it was them in control of the routes, and with more buses. More buses have been really good. Recently, there was a petition from residents of around 500 signatures, and that was taken to one of their meetings, and they spoke about it, but nothing came of it. But I just see this as another opportunity to just try and push at that door. Conscious that it might not happen, but just really wanted to put it on the radar, and appreciate the work that's gone into this. And apologies for bringing a ward issue to Cabinet.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. I'm not seeing any other indications from Cabinet. Councillor Hadley, anything to add?
Thank you. Yes. Well, thanks, Councillor Wilson. I think there are other communities, sort of, particularly on the outskirts of the conurbation, that would also value a service and don't have one. And there's something around what our rural communities in Dorset do around community buses and other ways in which we might crack the nut. So I suppose there is something about can we convince more bus to run a service? Could we subsidise the service? Or is there another way of doing it? And I guess that's where we need to think innovatively and I'd welcome if you want to have a discussion with the team. I think that would be great to do that. I think the other thing that from what Councillor Brown was talking about, there are some tweaks that we are making to our road network, and that may be for many people that is the most visual bit of it. So at Westbourne, we have put some temporary curbing to experiment and see whether that helps the buses get out. That is a bus that's on this programme. It's part of the bus service priority. It's actually proving to be more efficient for people to get through the junction. We don't yet know whether it's more efficient for the buses. They're looking at it, and they'd like a little bit more time. So we're actually looking to extend the trial for a bit to enable that to happen. And then we are doing work in Christchurch High Street at the moment to improve the bus realm, to improve the space outside the library. So it's also about pedestrians and space for pedestrians as they board the bus there. And the work at Southbourne and Purewell is both contentious because it's about 1 or 2 parking spaces by a bus stop, so a bus can actually get to the stop. So the disabled can get on and off the bus, and that's something that we are out to consultation at the moment with. So we're not yet to the point of, but those are all about running an efficient service for passengers in particular and keeping the buses to time, and that's all the sort of work that we're up to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. Right, so we'll go on to a vote on this paper. Can I see all those in favour of the recommendations? Thank you. That's unanimous. Right, so we're going to move on to agenda item 13, which is the planning reforms. Bear with me one moment, I've just lost my page. So planning reforms and the new local development scheme. I'm going to be proposing this report. Is there someone to second, please?
I'll second, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Martin. So to present this report, really this paper really just acknowledges some of the changes that are happening at a national level when it comes to government policy around planning. We know that the Labour government are incredibly ambitious about delivering housing, and one of the ways in which they're going to enable that to happen is by reforming, or well, already reformed, some of the rules within the planning system, which maybe aren't as welcoming to development as they need to be able to get to the numbers that the government are asking in terms of housing delivery. The government set out in December the new national planning policy framework, and they requested that all local authorities submit a new local development scheme plan to basically tell the government how we will be responding to those changes in the NPPF. The paper sets out a draft of some of those responses and also explains a little bit more, not just to Cabinet, but to the public, really, as a public paper, how we are dealing with some of those reforms and the impact that they will have, not just on our draft local plan, but also when we come to potentially to review the mandatory housing targets. Which the government have also indicated is quite a key part of the process. So just within the executive summary on that page, it adds a note that this has been written in advance of the planning conclusion by the Planning Inspectorate whilst they were looking at Part 1 local plan, and had a hearing in January 2025. So it's very difficult to firstly draft this paper, but also have that examination at the same time, because they're codependent. Basically, how we respond depends on how our local plan progresses, and how our local plan progresses also depends on how we respond. And just to kind of bring this to a head, it was actually this morning we have had a letter from government or from the examiner, which outlines some of their findings on the draft local plan. So I'm actually going to be amending this paper, which under B, where it says agree to the publication of a new draft local development scheme as required by government to a deadline of the 6th of March. And that's because with the deadline tomorrow, our officers, we need to digest those findings and basically decide how that will impact our local development scheme. So I want to give everyone the assurance that we are responding to government. We are going to make that deadline, but we need to fully understand the implications from what the examiner has found within our local plan and make sure that they are that they work together. I think it's really important to say that is a lot of work to do in a 24-hour period, but I think we've certainly got the focus and the drive to do it, not only because we need to be compliant with the government when it comes to housing and planning reforms, but also because it is in the best interests of our residents when it comes to our local plan decision making as well. So I'm just going to ask Councillor Martin if you agree to that amendment to the recommendation.
Absolutely, yeah, very happy with that.
Thank you. So as I've introduced that paper, I just want to see if there are any councillors who are outside of Cabinet who wish to speak on this. Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased in a way that you're taking this item before the discussion about the BDC. I might have a few words to say about that. But in relation to this paper, all I can do at these meetings, with the greatest of respect, is to offer you a different point of view. That's all I can do. To link this with your existing local plan, in my view, is a complete waste of time. A waste of your time, a waste of officers' time. I know that you're locked into that process. I know you have to go through it. I know you have to wait and see what the planning inspector says and the recommendations that you've just referred to. I get all of that. But please, that local plan was predicated on a completely different national planning policy framework. It is my view that it is redundant. It will be redundant. And there is no point, in my view, Chair, with the greatest of respect, trying to tweak it and trying to adjust your existing local plan to a set of circumstances which are now, because of the government, what the government is doing, a set of circumstances which are now utterly and completely different. It is my view that effectively what you will have to do is to start completely again. So when I looked at this draft local development scheme, I say, seriously, is that it? Because you're going to have to do a lot more than that. And as at today, I've no idea how this council is going to meet the ambitions which this government has set you. No idea at all. That paper doesn't help me at all understand how you're going to achieve that. So I'm not going to mention the BDC because I'll save that. You'll be pleased to hear for when we reach that item. But you know, Chair, and Councillor Wilson certainly knows that I will berate you constantly about the need to build more houses. So anything that you build is welcome in my book. But you have to understand that there are consequences. and you need a bigger plan. You cannot just go on saying, right, here is site A, let's do this on site A. You have to have a much bigger picture, and that's what I can't see. That's why, and I know I get criticised for accusing you of not being ambitious. It's me trying to get you to see a bigger picture, trying to do more. I'm always going to ask you to do more, but it's about trying to see how you're going to take this conurbation forward in terms of meeting that plan. One of the things that was said, I think it was last night, overview scrutiny, it seems so long ago now, that one of the important things about regeneration is to try and get some cross-party support. We know it doesn't happen quickly. We know it takes time. But if you can get a sense of common purpose about where you want to go, you can actually achieve quite a lot. And that's what I'm asking you to do, to just lift your eyes a bit above the immediate horizon and see where you want this place, where you want this conurbation to be in 10 years' time, because this may be how long this takes. But you cannot do that by taking it in bite-sized pieces. It's not going to work. So that's my view for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Canavan. Can I see if there are any other councillors outside of Cabinet who wish to speak on this? Nope. So I'll just respond to Councillor Canavan's points briefly, and I think really this is acknowledging the local plan process which came to council prior to the election. So we didn't know when the election was going to be. We were locked into the local plan process, and I think that in terms of consulting on the local plan, we're in a position where that's what we've got, and now we know where the government is heading. There is that, we know we're going to have to adapt to it, and this paper does its best in terms of doing that. However, the examination will reveal where we're going and what's possible and what's not. And of course, reflecting the National Planning Policy Framework is an essential part of any plan making. And whether we go down the route of a new local plan or perhaps a review, or if it's absolutely fine, then we'll need to consider our options and how we would fit into mandatory housing targets there. So I just wanted to give some assurance that that is very much on my mind, particularly as this is part of my portfolio, not only because I personally recognise the housing need, but also because of that understanding that we're not going to wriggle away from mandatory housing targets if we, in one way or another. But we are in a situation where these will be imposed, potentially, considering the sheer volume. And we need to work within that system as best we can to get the best for our residents as a whole, including those who are struggling for housing. And finally, just to add on that kind of joined up approach, one of the things I've been talking about within my, local government networks is really where there is really strategic joined up work across an area. That's where you're able to get that level of investment, especially with that cross-party support. So we've had, I always look to places like Plymouth where they've been able to drive significant investment by recognising that regeneration of the town centre was more important than the politics. So I really welcome that view to work together collectively on a strategy. I think where we've had quite a turbulent political makeup of BCP Council since the beginning. Some of that thinking hasn't been able to take place. I don't think it was possible for it to take place. But as we realise, our regeneration ambitions, we understand where the government is going, we're coming to a much more stable position where I think we would have the cross-party consensus to do that work and be able to be really serious about regeneration and investment in our not just in our town centres, but also across the whole of BCP. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And I think, of course, the local plan plays a really, really important part in that vision as well. Okay, so I'm going to see if any members from Cabinet would like to speak on this. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I thought the discussion last night at Overview and Scrutiny Board was really good, and I do think that actually that Councillor Canavan has a significant point in terms of longer term planning and how we can make things work cross party, and it is difficult because it's actually really interesting because I was going to mention Plymouth as well, because when I was talking to someone about Plymouth, they were saying it used to be that it was between Labour and Conservative, and effectively anything that one did, the other undid. And they managed to get together and right the way across the political divide to say, no, the city, developing the city and having a vision for the future of the city is more important than party politics. So it would be really good to do that. But I think if you take the Winter Garden site, for example, there is a very different view between the previous Conservative administration and everybody else in terms of how we might achieve what we might achieve, and whether you knock down the Bic and do some flats there and put put a conference centre in the Winter Garden site. But we've also got huge environmental constraints as an area, and that's a significant constraint on our ability to build. We have massive infrastructure needs if we're going to increase our population very significantly, and that's again a significant element of that. And a dichotomy between are we building a place for tourists to come and have flats and have a lovely time, or are we building homes for people? And that seems to be actually at the heart of the the political difference that we face. And there's a bit of a boom and bust in terms of this. We need a constant supply of housing. We need to try and support people to be able to live and to get to a better place. So I think if we can construct aside from this really, if we can construct a consensus across the parties around what does it actually look like? Sorry, and the other part of that I'm in a town centre ward is if we got the skies in the town centre in order to preserve greenbelt or the more rural ideal of some of our suburbs, that puts a lot of pressure on the town centres, and there's something about trying to be a bit more equitable. So we need to have that debate, and I think that's a really important thing to do. But we also need to respond to the national government and the framework, and to work forward with whatever the outcome of the review of our local plan is. And we knew, I think, as government changed and as this happened, that we're going to have to revisit the plan very quickly, whatever happens. So we'll need to get on with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Any other Cabinet members wish to speak? Andy Martin.
Thank you, Leader. Just one very quick point, which is somewhat picking up one of the themes of Councillor Hadley's speech. So in the last couple of years, this council has developed an awful lot of environmental policies, biodiversity net gain, the urban forest strategy, financing nature, and of course the really strong environmental protection policies within the local plan. Obviously, I'm very much, given some of the things that I'm involved in, very much supporting of all those policies. So I am incredibly concerned about the balance to be struck here between protecting our unique, incredible environment along the coastline and in other places in BCP, with the need to build more houses. And I was interested to hear what Councillor Canavan was saying just now about what sort of place do we want this to be in 10 years' time. I know what I want it to be, and that is somewhere where our environment is protected, and we don't sacrifice what we have here, because obviously once we do, we've lost a lot of what this amazing area is. So I just want to to put that environmental piece back on the agenda. And I did criticise Councillor Canavan at full council some time ago when he talked about the house building, and Labour was elected on this policy and we had to suck it up, and he didn't mention the environment. And I just feel it's my duty to constantly keep that on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Any other councillors wishing to speak on this item? Councillor Herrick.
Just a couple of notes in response to the NPPF, I think, in general, to be honest. The first is that I did check with the Director of Planning how many homes already had planning permission in BCP, and that's close to 6,000, which is a couple of years' supply. And there's nothing within the NPPF that really kind of either provides a carrot or a stick for developers to really get these projects moving. which would then buy some time for local authorities to really make sure that these plans are fully developed as we go forwards. And the other for me, with my tourism hat on, is that a lot of the hoteliers are really disappointed that there's no provision to deal with Airbnbs, which obviously not only affects the local housing supply, but also they're creeping into some of the communities that are never really designed to deal with businesses in the same way that they're affecting now. And I don't really have an answer within the paper. It's just expressing an opinion on the MPPF. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Herrett. Right, so I'm just going to very briefly sum up on that. And I do think something I always want to mention is the corporate strategy that we have as a council, which was actually voted for pretty much cross-party. I think councillors from every group supported elements of the corporate strategy. And that does set the direction for where we as a local authority go. It is a democratic document. It's gone through the democratic process, it's also consulted upon, and so on. And that is called a shared vision. And I think we need to recognise how important that document is, because it actually sets out what we as a council want to achieve over the 4 years of the administration. And I think that it is ambitious because it sets out particularly around protection of the environment, as Councillor Martin has said, but there's also really important places there around things like delivering affordable, secure housing. And I think where we sometimes get into a bit of a muddle is that we see those things as primarily opposed. And I see our role as a council as raising those issues with government and being able to get the legislation in place that protects the interests of our communities. You know, I want to deliver housing. I really do. I think there is a need in our community. However, we need to be raising our voices around making sure that those houses also protect the environment and in fact help gain ecology in terms of BNG. We also need to make sure that those housings are built to a standard that residents need. We know there is a lot of shoddy housing across BCP, and actually this is our opportunity to say no. Housing should be safe, it should be secure, it should be warm, and it should be of a standard that can survive the next 50, 100 years. And I also think we have as a council have a priority around putting communities first and making sure that their voices are heard within the local plan process and also within the planning process, which is an outcome of not just the reforms to the MPPF but also the local plan. And so I kind of see this. We have to work together. We have to work together across government to help deliver their ambition, but we also have a role as elected councillors to represent our communities in that. And I don't think those are diametrically opposed views. I think that it is about working collaboratively and finding where we can achieve together. So I'm really keen to do that, and I think that this paper at least highlights some of the ways in which we can be a bit more compliant with government, and hopefully when we know a little bit more about where our local plan is heading, we'll be able to provide a fuller response based on feedback from the examiner. So can I ask Cabinet if they agree with the recommendation? If you could indicate, please.
As amended.
As amended. Thank you. That is unanimous. Okay, so we're going to go on to the Climate Action Annual Report. Councillor Hadley, I believe you are going to be presenting this one. Is there someone to second?
I'm quite happy to second that, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burton. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, this is the fifth climate report since BCP was created, and we determined, or I determined last year, to try and change the format of this report. It was a 100-page report last year, and to develop a more interactive dashboard so people could find their way around our progress and in particular our targets, which partly arose because there was a request to full council that we lay out our targets, but it was work that was already actually underway. So I was very happy to accept that recommendation. The progress has not been as fast as I would like. I think that's partly because there is a lag in terms of what's showing and what's happened. There's work, for example, at the Two Rivers meets to significantly change the energy supply and controls, which I'm hoping will significantly reduce the gas usage at that site. We need to obviously that to flow through into the figures. There have also been some changes in terms of the recording of the housing stock by BCP Homes, which has increased the baseline, which has gone in the wrong direction for us, and that's a bit unfortunate. So the recommendations are around noting the report and the draft roadmap, which is a work in progress, and that we are also working on a roadmap for the area-wide target 2045 to coincide with the work on the local area energy plan. There is within the targets diagram, there is some work that we've been doing on Camford Heath around recreating a wetland. And as a means to capture carbon within our green space, that's a really significant piece, and it actually helps to offset some of our carbon footprint. I'm not into carbon offsetting in the wide sense, in terms of giving someone money to do something else somewhere completely on the planet, which you have no visibility of, or access to. But where we can do that sort of work, that's a really interesting way in which we can mitigate the residual. But I think we need to work harder and faster to get to net zero by 2030, as is our mandated by government of us. And what we've attempted to do this year is to lay out more clearly how we intend to get the steps we need to take, some of which will need investment that we will have to take some difficult decisions about. Do we do that or not? But I think at least, it's bringing it out more into the open, more transparent, to have that clarity with the public about the steps we need to take, the work that we're doing, and we've already had things like the fleet renewal strategy moves us in the right direction in terms of that element of the work. But the biggest element by far is our leased out buildings. The biggest element of that is our housing stock in Bournemouth and Poole, and also then the leisure centres. So we're trying to hit the big targets and work through that. I'm very hopeful that next year the grass will have moved downwards significantly. I'll be very cross if they haven't, but I'm doing what I can to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. I'm going to look to our overview and scrutiny members to see if anyone would like to speak on this item, considering it went to place. Nope. Are there any councillors who are outside of Cabinet who wish to speak on it? Nope. Over to Cabinet. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I had the pleasure of being at the Overview and Scrutiny Board that it went to. Normally, you're just waiting to kind of waiting for your bit to start, as opposed to maybe listening as intently to the agenda item before it as you would like to. But it was a really interesting debate, and I thought there was a good challenge from the Overview and Scrutiny Board, but as well, I thought the portfolio holder did excellently, and I was actually sat next to Kelly Ansell, my Director of Housing and Communities, and she turned and said, there's nobody more suited to their portfolio than Andy is there. And once my ego got over that, I couldn't help but agree. You know, I think he really is pushing the envelope as best we can in this work that we're doing. He's always banging the drum. Something that did come out of that was the work around BCP Homes, and both in our Poole and Bournemouth neighbourhoods, being one of the biggest factors in terms of needing to improve in climate action. So out of that, well, firstly, that is going to be a really, really huge task in terms of funding. The numbers are astronomical in terms of getting to the standard that we want to. We've got a 30-year business plan coming forward, and that is indicating that the decarbonisation is going to cost a lot, and we're going to struggle with it. But out of that, we're setting up a meeting with myself and the portfolio holder and our maintenance team to look at how we can tackle that. I've also recently had a meeting with MPs, and I've raised this issue. So it's something that we're focused on. I think part of that is being able to raise our rents beyond consumer price index that we currently are, but also that's only going to go so far. We need to be getting external funding from government if we're to tackle this. But I just want to say really it was a really interesting debate over in scrutiny, and I just want to thank the portfolio holder for his work on this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Any other Cabinet members wishing to speak on this? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, very briefly. I mean, there's an awful lot in here that we could talk about. I just wanted to talk on one area, which is an area I've been interested in for a while, the local area energy plan, which I know the report says is going to be coming to Cabinet later this year. And I just think it's really important. I remember being in I think it was an audit committee meeting a couple of years ago under the previous administration, and there was a red mark against the local area energy plan. And when I queried it, it was, funding had been stopped for that, so they'd stopped work on it. And for me, it's so strategically important for our area that to have actually had a pause and stopped work on that at that point was really detrimental. And so I'm really pleased to see it's here and it's going to be coming before us. Some colleagues know I do some work in the energy sector, and just yesterday I was on a call with stakeholders and local authority representatives in the northeast of England, in Newcastle and that sort of area, talking about local area energy plans and talking about the demand on our electricity networks. And I know we've talked a lot about the demand of shifting transport to electricity generated with EVs, and then domestic heating, the more pressure being put on our electricity network as people move to air source heat pumps. And the view there in the industry was that, shifting electricity supply for transport and for domestic heating was big, but artificial intelligence is going to be just as big, if not bigger. And that was their worry, that they said basically we just need to generate more and more electricity however we can, because as data centers get built and people get used to doing things using artificial intelligence, and that's going to draw a lot of electricity, they said that's probably going to be that's probably going to be more than the transfer to electric vehicles. Getting a local area energy plan drafted and prepared and actually start to understand those sorts of issues is really going to be critical for our area in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Burton?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I mean, just adding to what's been said already, I think it's a really interesting report, and it just shows how complex this area is and how much work needs doing, and it really helps people understand when you get a report like this. I also share the unease about carbon offset. I always think that you should deal with what the problems that you make locally yourself. However, I think the work on Camford Heath is great because we don't like to talk about our wards, but of course Camford Heath is in Bearwood and Merley ward. This work is done in there. It also demonstrates to people all the different things that are involved in this. I think it's a great report, and I'd also mirror what Councillor Brown said. Our energy use, people don't realise the amount of energy we're using with our data. Every time we back up our data, we are using actually a phenomenal amount of energy, and I do see that as being a challenge which is a bit under the radar at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Herrick?
Just on that, actually, I asked the Overview and Scrutiny Environment and Place to have a look at data storage on behalf of the council, which I think is still on their forward plan, lurking. But it's a really interesting challenge. I'm just going to give a further shout out to the dashboard. We were taken on a bit of a magical mystery tour by the officers during that, and you can really get stuck into the data and disappear down a rabbit hole if you're interested. Which, given what we've just talked about where the data is, maybe burning more energy looking at it than kind of gets consumed. But it's certainly really interesting and very worthwhile for anyone to take a look and see where the council's up to.
Thank you, Councillor Herrick. Any other Cabinet members wishing to speak? I was just going to add that reading the report really brings to life a lot of what's going on within our climate, within tackling the climate and ecological emergency, and brings out some of the really ambitious ways and some of the things that we're doing. And I'm really pleased that we're part of for example, UK 100 as a network, and we're sharing some of that really in-depth best practice about how to get the best for our communities when it comes to climate action. The only other thing I just wanted to mention was really around the budget. And we recently had our council budget go to full council for approval. And I was quite shocked actually that the Conservative opposition decided to bring an amendment which would have essentially have made our entire climate action team and those working in the council tackling the climate and ecological emergency redundant. And it just makes me very, very glad that we are in a position to progress this when on a global platform we're seeing countries shying away from their climate responsibilities, which is quite scary, I think, for people who are really passionate and all of us actually who want to see our local area succeed in its climate aims and ambitions. So, Councillor Hadley, over to you to sum up.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, the pause in the local area energy plan was a real challenge because I think that has delayed our ability to move forward. The Leader and I had a really interesting discussion just the other day with Scottish Southern Energy, with the element of it that deals with the high voltage and providing energy to the area. We are very significantly constrained in terms of our energy supply to the conurbation. That could mean power cuts if we don't sort it out. And so, so part of that is about getting Scottish and Southern to invest, and they are investing, but being clear with them about where we need the energy and how. And that applies equally to where we have our depots for our refuse collection vehicles, where the bus company have their depots, how the South West Railway, as we look to increase the train frequency across the conurbation, how the energy supply for that. There's lots of bits on the transport front, and then the homes and the not just actually our housing stock, because when you look at the 2045 target, it's about the private rented sector, it's about owned homes, and that's a much bigger problem because we have been investing in trying to help our most needy with fuel security and fuel poverty by looking after our housing stock. But when you look in the private rented sector, there are some really leaky homes, and that's an even bigger challenge which we're trying to work on. One of the really interesting bits about the data centres is, whether we have data centres in the conurbation. I don't believe we particularly have. Most organisations have outsourced their data centres to the cloud, which is this mythical thing somewhere elsewhere. But actually, that is still data centres in various locations. And the opportunities that brings, because they have to do a lot of cooling, which creates a lot of heat. And we are also looking at heat networks and how we work forward with that in association with the NHS, so the local university hospital, and others, and what that can do to more efficiently heat people's homes and make use of waste heat. In fact, even in the transmission supply, they were saying, we've got to have oil-fired cooling systems for the transformers. And I'm going, can we use that heat? And I've also been talking with Perenco about their wells and the heat that's at depth. So some really interesting stuff. And yes, the fact that in America they seem to be going completely backwards on their climate commitments is a real struggle for us all. And given the recent fires in California, it is absolutely astounding that they are prepared to let that happen when it's quite clear that the ferocity of those infernos in Beverly Hills and that sort of area was entirely due to man-made climate change, and yet they're going backwards on it. I have to hope that is a short-term thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. So I'm going to see if Cabinet agree with those recommendations set out in the report. If we could indicate now, please. Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to agenda item 15, which is the Children's Services Capital Strategy, which is for 25-26 and 27-28. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Burton to present this report. Can I ask if there's someone to second that one for you? Thank you very much, Councillor Hannah. Councillor Burton.
Thank you very much, Leader. So as you said, the strategy is for 25, 26, 27, 28. This replaces the previous Children's Services Capital Programme, which the report says was from October 21. I think, from memory, it went through Cabinet in February 22. Saying that Ofsted was last here, just to remind us of that. So the purpose of this report is to explain how we're going to manage the school estate that we are at present responsible for, and how we'll be looking at investing in the new provision to expand in areas that are currently lacking or increasing, especially around the requirement around SEND. If you look at the reasons for recommendations, you'll see that the areas that need balancing with 22.6 million predicted funding. So just for information, academies and free schools are allocated conditional funding through the Education and Skills Funding Agency. So Mason's work and the academies are not part of this capital programme. However, the council does fund work at academies and free schools in order to ensure there are sufficient school places and sufficient suitable provision for SEND. I would say that getting all the predictions right is very complex. We have to predict the managed remedial work within schools estate based on the condition surveys which are undertaken on all maintained schools on a 5-year rolling plan. So all schools have had an updated survey within the last 5 years. Works are given a condition grading A to D and a priority grading 1 to 4, which helps target the funding to where the remedial work is most needed. Added to that, we need to predict pupil need. We have a new, expanded and dedicated team in place. This was until recently just a team of 1, but we have increased in capacity here for better predicting. Capital programme splits the report is split into 2. The schemes with prior approval in Appendix 1, you will recognise some of these larger schemes that have already gone through Cabinet and Council, and new schemes requiring approval. This is what the new team is working on for the life of the strategy, and individual costs of schemes to be developed in line with the timeline of relevant bid process. You'll see the influence of the new team as the new schemes as they come through. We're talking to Academy Trusts so that we can find innovative ways to better manage demand of alternative provision. Academy Trusts and their schools are becoming increasingly interested in developing new provision, and the team are working with them to ensure the right provision is being planned to get the best possible outcome for our pupils. Yesterday I visited Camford Heath Teach Trust, opening of I did something I've never done before. I cut a ribbon, which is, it's one of those life things, isn't it? Wow, I cut a ribbon yesterday. But that was a result of some investment that we did previously. Investing in the development of special places, alternative provision and inclusion is continuing, or rather accelerating. This is the main reason that the team have been expanded. So it won't be a surprise to anybody that the strategy focuses on the Council's SEND improvement plan, including SEND sufficiency strategy and belonging strategy. I will also highlight that climate change carbon reduction, what we've just been talking about in the previous, the capital programme will contribute 650,000 to the council carbon emission reduction target. Now, having worked in schools, I can really see that this money can be well spent in schools. Schools can use a lot of energy, and I'm sure that we can find ways of saving it. The report mentions at 5 sources of estimated funding. My notes say that the DFE might, so there's quite a lot of questions here. We're not sure what it is, but there could well be more sources. At 13, the report highlights previous successful bids. As always, we're hopeful that further bids will be successful and we can match the need to bids. A couple of explanations that just so people understand. Wraparound care is mentioned in the report. That is childcare that takes place before and after school for primary school aged children. And the Healthy Pupils Capital Grant funding is also mentioned, which is intended to improve children's and young people's physical and mental health by improving and increasing availability to facilities for physical activity, healthy eating, mental health and well-being and medical condition. I'm just looking because I know the chair of Children's Own Scrutiny wanted to add something to this. I had a message later to say that she might not be able to manage to stay to the end. I can see that she's now gone offline. I have just got one comment that she just emailed me earlier on. Would you like me just to add that now rather than? Yep. So basically she said that she doesn't think there's an awful lot that the committee wanted to add to the report. We noted and agreed the paper. Discussed alternative provision at some length in the committee and wraparound care, and we'll be looking at further into alternative provision and in a future meeting. So I'm just adding that, not from me, but from the scrutiny meeting. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burton. I'm going to first look to any councillors who are not on Cabinet who wish to speak on this paper. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. It occurred to me when I was looking at this paper and relating it to SIL, the strategic SIL paper, because when I looked at the strategic SIL paper, there were provision in it for use of capital for educational purposes. And I immediately considered that, well, what's one of the council's biggest problems, and that is SEND, and how much we need to invest in it in order to reduce our costs. And I wasn't sure if SIL provision would be allowed to make the investment in new schools, for example, or conversion of existing schools. And so it relates to this paper, I think, more than the strategic. I didn't raise it before under the strategic SIL paper, but it just occurred to me, is there an avenue for funding additional schools or converting schools through the SIL mechanism? At the moment, I don't think it is contained within option 2 of the SIL paper. But I just think it needs some consideration because of the importance to the council, and it's and not just for the benefit of the children, of course, but also for the finances of the council. It's a big area to focus on. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Are there any other councillors who want to speak from outside of Cabinet? Nope. So I'm just going to briefly respond to Councillor Bartlett and say that yes, within option 2, there is nothing in terms of educational provision apart from providing that what was agreed in the section 106 with Merley and Bear Wood. However, within that 18% of discretionary send, that will be where we consider pretty much everything else on that list. So I absolutely, it is within the remit of strategic SIL to spend on education provision, as from the previous from the fact we've included Merley and Bear Wood on it, and it would be at our discretion as decision makers. My view is the next stage is to get the governance set around that to really look at the priorities. But it could be that we use some of that strategic SIL to ease that pressure within SEND. Right, I saw that Councillor Hannah was indicating. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'm very happy to have seconded this and to support Councillor Burton, and I'm not going to repeat anything that he has said. I think it was a excellent summary of the report. I would like to say, though, that as someone who has been in the position of chair of scrutiny for children's services elsewhere for a number of years, I'm very conscious of the amount of work involved for officers in putting together not just the report, but the programme as a whole and in seeing the programme through. So I would like to express appreciation to the director and her team for all of the work involved in it. Like Councillor Bartlett, I was particularly pleased to see the investment in the SEND improvement plan, so thoroughly endorse that. I hear his suggestion in terms of the use of SIL funding. I won't say whether I'm for or against that, but I will say that it seems to me that we're going to have some tough decisions when it comes to SIL funding, given all of the competing requests for its use. So I'm not sure that that's an easy one to respond to. And my other thought is that when it comes to all of the various issues with regard to SEND, I really think that it is for central government to resolve those issues rather than for us to be using SIL or any other form of local funding. It is a central government issue. But that said, I'm very happy to second the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Any other members looking to speak on this one? Nope. Councillor Burton, anything to add?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Been following on from the discussion on SIL. I was thinking when I talked the previous SIL, because of course funding the schools in Bearwood and Merley actually frees up spaces in other schools. And if those spaces are in the right place and we can do the right thing, of course, that then frees up space to invest in SEND in those schools. So there is already in that some idea, but it's of course it's matching the right space with the right need, which is a lot more complex than and you could think it could possibly be. I mean, I would also, Councillor Hand, echo your thanks to officers. You're quite right. These papers do take a lot. I had a fascinating meeting with the officer who wrote this report earlier this week, and there's so much goes behind this. I also agree central government really with SEND have got to come up with some funding. However, one thing, and I'm not disagreeing with you here, but one thing I would say is that this sort of thing is demonstrating to central government that we are capable of coming up with solutions if they provide what they need to provide to help us do it. It shows that we're capable and we're willing to do that. But yes, we can scratch at it, can't we? But we do need somebody to come in with some more money, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burton. Right, we're going to take this one to a vote. Can I see all those who agree with the recommendations? Thank you. That's unanimous. So we're going to jump back to item number 11, which is the Bournemouth Development Company LLP business plan. I presented this at overview and scrutiny last night, and I'm going to be presenting the report now. Can I ask if I have a seconder? Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. And of course, there was a recommendation from overview and scrutiny. So once I've presented the report, we'll go to Councillor Bartlett and then back to Cabinet, and then open it out to any other councillors who wish to speak on this one. Okay, so the purpose of the paper was really to provide Cabinet with an update since we held the Bournemouth Development Company Strategy Day in December, which focused on the Winter Garden site in particular. And the paper asked for an extension of the option execution date to be compliant with the BDC membership agreement. Planning permission was sought and granted for the site in 2019, but that's no longer viable, and it's really because of things like rising construction costs, an inability to borrow, and basically the scheme just grew completely out of control to a point where there was a £28 million gap in being able to deliver a building that sits upon a podium above retaining the public car parking spaces. So we've now got to look at the Winter Garden site in terms of what are our priorities as a council. Do we want to deliver housing on the site? Do we want to meet the challenges of the housing crisis and provide people with over 500 homes, which a proportion of which will be affordable? Or do we want to leave the site? You know, it is bringing in an income for the council. It is a very popular car park. However, really this comes down to where we want to go. And like I said last night, I believe it's a political decision. My view is that we need to do this exploration work with our partners in BDC, with Muse, to make sure that we're making the right decision and to inform us properly on what will be viable on the site. And viability was a really strong theme of yesterday's overview and scrutiny committee. We are confined by what is viable to deliver, and because this site is within our ownership, we have real control over that. So actually, when it comes to if we can just see if something is viable and it aligns with our principles as an administration, and it will deliver something that is positive for the community, then we can proceed. But actually, if we find out that the viability just isn't there, then we need to consider what our options are then. So in terms of moving this forward, we had the paper mainly looks at the option execution date and taking that to the 30th of September 2028, allowing more time to be invested into the site and making sure that we are making a decision based on the evidence. The paper also references the partnership business plan, which and the paper adopts a bit of a timetable for showing how that will come forward. So before I say any more, I'm going to hand over to Councillor Bartlett, who has a recommendation from Overview and Scrutiny, and then as Cabinet we'll deal with that recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Leader. Just a bit of background about the paper coming to Overview and Scrutiny. Initially, the aim was for that paper to contain the new BDC business plan, but that slipped. But in the meantime, there was also a need to progress some, the option dates, and so we agreed that we would still look at the paper. Because we knew that the option day issue was coming forward to Cabinet, and that's why we still dealt with it over scrutiny. But the aim was to see what the BDC plan was going to be. So when we discussed this, naturally the debate in overview and scrutiny went into a whole raft of different issues outside of what the paper, not unexpectedly as well. And so it was very difficult to sort of pinpoint, the issue specifically about the business plan and about the option date. But what I would like to do, if you don't mind, Leader, I'd like to talk now to what the Scrutiny Committee said, but I would like to be invited to give my own personal views on this in a moment, if that's okay. Thanks. So after a debate about all sorts of issues, we did. I and it was me that made the proposal that we should actually defer the decision on the option execution date until the new BDC business partnership plan had been approved by the Cabinet. And the reason behind making that proposal was that, and a lot is in the history, of course, of it, because I've been associated with this programme now for over 10 years. And when I thought about it, I was 65 when it started. I'm now 75. And if we go over it again, I'm not sure if I'll be here, but I'll be 85. So I've got a bit of an interest in this. The main driver behind it was that things have constantly changed throughout, not just market forces, but also the administration has changed several times. These kind of developments take years and years to come to fruition. And it was interesting that we actually did end up with a consented site, but actually for various market forces and other reasons, it wasn't possible to take it forward. One of those was about, one of the issues was about viability. So I have to say that's the first time I've seen in any paper an explanation of what actually happened and why the development wasn't taken forward. It actually set out the reasons. I've not heard them or seen them before, and I often wondered why actually it didn't proceed. But as you mentioned, Leader, about viability, and this is why I think I was very nervous about going forward with the option execution date, because I felt that could tie us into not being able to explore other options that may be available. And given that the business plan is imminent, in fact, it's much better to understand what the business plan is and to follow the process before we start jumping forward and actually taking a step that should follow sequentially from the business plan. And one of the issues I think that we really got to bottom out is that viability issue. What really is viability? What does that mean? Does it mean a return for the commercial investor, or does it mean a return on equity or a return on investment for the council? Does it mean a financial benefit, or does it mean the benefit of new homes in the right place? And when we talk about the new local plan, there was an opportunity there for 370 odd houses that we've not been able to implement for all those different reasons. So my concern was about, yes, let's make sure we follow the right steps, make sure we all understand what we're doing and not jump ahead prematurely to a decision that we may regret because it may constrain us. And that's as simple as that. So that was the recommendation, which says that the Overview and Scrutiny Board agreed the following recommendation: that a decision to extend the Winter Gardens site option date is deferred by Cabinet until the new BDC Partnership Business Plan has been approved by Cabinet. So that was the debate for the ONS. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I'll now invite you to make your personal representations on the paper.
Okay, thank you. I've probably already covered a few of them. You know, the BDC arrangement with the council is a very complex members agreement. And since its inception, things have changed for the agreement and the partners. The circumstances are now very different from what they were originally. Not least of those is the fact that the BDC operation has effectively been stalled for several years. And we've not seen a business plan coming forward, you know, annually as it was supposed to be. And it does actually hold a debate about how the council wants to take forward its regeneration. What is the most effective way of doing it? Does the BDC model still offer the scope for doing the things that we want to do? I would say straight away that the need to invest in social and affordable housing is probably already slightly contrary to the objectives of the partner in the BDC arrangement. I can't speak on behalf of them. I'm just surmising that personally because they're a commercial organisation and what they're trying to do is earn profits for their shareholders. Their objective is not to establish new affordable homes. Theirs is to make some money out of it. And we all know that it's very difficult to actually make money from building social housing. So, you know, the model itself, I would question straight away. The other thing I'd like to just touch on are the risks. The risk of proceeding outside of the agreed members' agreement. Because I think this, and I know you're aware of the circumstances because I wrote to you this morning about it, but there are a number of steps within the members' agreement that have to be followed sequentially in order for a site to come forward. And I don't believe that they have been followed. I won't go into the detail of it, you're aware of them, and it does bear very much upon the option, you know, extending the option date, because actually there's no need to do that. If my understanding of the option of the agreement is correct, you don't need to do it. So in fact, in order to take and one of the reasons for that, it applies to a site that a development that no longer exists. And I point out that there is no Winter Gardens scheme on the capital programme for this current financial year, nor is there for next. So there are a set of steps that you have to take in accordance with the members' agreement that we haven't done. And I think on that basis alone, you should not be proceeding with this. Proceed with it once you've got the business plan in place, yes, and then you can follow the process. And that's what I think, if that's the way you want to go with regeneration, that's what you should be doing. Yeah, so I'm not going to go into the detail about my concerns about I don't understand it fully, you know, and I think you've got to be pretty bright to understand the BDC agreement. It's very, very complex. I just wonder about our overall approach to regeneration and whether that, you know, I know I support Councillor Canavan's desire for us to invest in social and affordable housing. I always have done. But it's going to take, and actually the councils have always been very good at that. It didn't actually make any difference if you could afford it or you needed to make money out of it. And I always go back to the end of the last war when the whole country was completely broke, but didn't stop building council estates all over the country, which are still in use today. And that takes government backing in order to do that. And I think that anything that the council can do in this regard without support from the government is basically tinkering around the edges. And so I think it is actually government that's got to take some responsibility. If they want all these houses, well, we can see just how difficult it is for a council to achieve that sort of thing. And we have the added complexity here of being bounded by borders that prevents us from going too far outside of that, particularly with the coast being on one side. So it's very, very difficult. But I would like to suggest that you really look at the way you want to take regeneration forward as the first step before you even start contemplating about what your relationship with BDC is going to be and what this specific thing. Just one last word about the local plan. This really worries me. Already the scheme that is being offered up or suggested is at variance significantly with the current approved local plan, which is still live in Bournemouth. The second phase is actually at variance with the local plan that's been drafted and it has been for consultation. So we're already at variance with some of the things that we'd have to adhere to. The other issue is about affordability and financing. We did have a relationship on the Winter Garden site with Homes England at one stage. What happened there? That all fell apart for whatever reason, I don't know. But now we're bringing that now seems to be the key to opening and unlocking this development. But we had that issue before, and it fell flat. So the next stage, of course, is the issue about interest rates. When the previous scheme was considered not viable, it was when interest rates were at rock bottom. They've never been so low. And now interest rates have gone through the roof, as well as building costs. Absolutely. So what I'm suggesting here is the barriers to taking this development forward are absolutely astronomical. And I think we really need to think very carefully before we lock ourselves into an agreement by putting this execution date in, because it might lock us into something that we can't get out of, and that limits our choices for what we may wish to do. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I was going to see if any other members wish to speak on this, and then we'll address the comments as part of the debate. Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with a lot of what Councillor Bartlett has just said. I'm going to come back to this option execution date, which is a strange term, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Because I'm not sure what difference moving that date makes. For me, the most important recommendation in those list of recommendations on the paper is the review of the governance of the BDC. That, for me, is critical. I am of the view that the BDC, as currently constructed, does not offer this council the mechanism through which to deliver this sort of development. So I think I support what Councillor Bartlett has just said, but I go much further than that and say I think you need to look at whether it's fit for purpose as a vehicle to deliver this sort of development. And the issue of the Winter Garden site specifically, I absolutely support your desire to build more houses and to use that site to build more houses. But I said earlier, that kind of strategy has consequences about what else you do in the town centre, where else you have car parking arrangements, what other development there is going to be within the town centre. I don't know, Chair, whether moving that date makes any difference. I don't know whether it locks us in to some kind of permanent arrangement with the BDC or not. I don't know whether it offers us any flexibility in saying to Muse or any other developer, do you know what, you can't do this, let's find somebody else who can. That's my concern about it. I think to some extent the business development plan of the BDC is a little bit of a separate issue in my view, obviously it's important for us to see it, but I'm not sure it's actually going to fill us with a massive amount of confidence that they're going to be able to move forward with not just this project, but frankly, any project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Canavan. Any other members from outside of Cabinet wishing to speak? No. So I'm just going to come back and address some of those concerns. And it was a really interesting debate yesterday at Overview and Scrutiny, which covered a lot of ground and probably we could have been there for another few hours afterwards, talking about not just this site, but also general regeneration stuff. And I think it's something that's great is that as a council, we clearly have councillors who are really, really keen in that area. And I'm wondering now how we can best make use of kind of that passion across the chamber and work together on realising some of these aims. However, that is a conversation for another day. Otherwise, we'll be here for another few hours. So just to address some of the specific issues relating to the Winter Gardens. So Councillor Bartlett mentioned about Homes England. The big issue for Homes England was that they would be subsidising retaining the public parking. And for them, that was not something they were interested in doing. So again, it does come back to this issue of viability. And at this point, we don't know what's viable on the site. And I like that we're talking about it not just in terms of financial viability, we're also talking about it in terms of the social, addressing the need, the environmental viability, and all those things that as a council we care about. It's important to recognise that the context has really changed, not just in terms of the local government, the fact we've got a different administration than when BDC was first formed, the fact we're a different council from when it was first formed, and also the fact that we now have a different government. The biggest things that have changed, though, I would say, are within the partnership itself. We now have Muse, who are our primary partners, and they are... I think one of the things that really sticks out to me as a shift is they have a really strong relationship with Homes England, and we now have a really strong relationship with Homes England. And I think it's that relationship which is going to be key in delivering viable schemes on this site in particular, and then probably the other ones as well. The other big shift is that we're taking this from being a very commercially led scheme to something that is much more housing led, and that's because 6 years ago, we were looking for commercial space in the town centre, and that was because we were pre-COVID and people didn't work from home on the scale that they do now. There was certainly a very different appetite for development of commercial space than there is now. And now the biggest need in our community is around housing. So this is about responding to that and being flexible, which is why I'm not keen. I think there's things to learn from that previous scheme, but progressing it with the viability issues would have just been impossible. And I think now is a chance to be realistic within the context. There will be different changes that come through as the market changes and planning policy changes and so on. But we do need to be realistic about this site. And for me, the question comes down to is, do we want to explore what's viable? Do we want to explore delivering houses? Or do we want to leave it as it is? And for me and for our ambition, which is obviously in the corporate strategy, saying that we do want to deliver those sustainable homes, sustainable, safe and affordable, we need to at least be doing this work to find out. However, having said that, we've been rapidly trying to understand the ins and outs of a very complex members document this morning, which is why I deferred this paper until the end, trying to get some legal advice on where we stand, because I think you're right. The question is what is the consequence of delaying this? Because I don't really want to be an administration that delays key regeneration projects, but there is a question here about the legality and the governance of our responsibility as a partner in BDC. So I am going to take on board Scrutiny's recommendation, but I'm also going to leave a bit of room in there, is that if we find out something is absolutely critical within the BDC agreement, that we do have a bit of flexibility to be able to come back on it, and I'm quite keen to keep in the loop pretty much any councillors who are interested in this. Very happy to share the details of that once we've worked through. So I'm going to be replacing recommendation 1 with agrees the principle of an extension of the Winter Garden site option execution date, with details to be agreed, to be delegated to the Chief Operations Officer acting in consultation with the leader of the council, or until Cabinet have had the opportunity to review a revised partnership business plan, including the site development plan for the revised Winter Garden scheme. So that doesn't go the full way in addressing scrutiny's concerns, and I do absolutely recognise that, but I just wanted to give you my assurance that because nothing can move forward without my being consulted on it, I really take to heart the concerns within overview and scrutiny, and we'll be raising those throughout the process as we find out more about where we sit within the members' agreement. So I'm just going to ask Councillor Wilson if he agrees to that recommendation.
Yep, I'm more than happy to agree with that.
Thank you very much. I was going to see if anyone wants to comment on that. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, Councillor Bartlett, as a response. No. I'm going to hand over to. That's all right. I'm going to hand over to Cabinet to see if anyone wants to respond there. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Leader. I think it was a very interesting debate over overview and scrutiny last night. I think you've helpfully addressed a lot of what I would want to comment and say. But I suppose in terms of the viability, firstly, on the strategy day that we had with BDC and Muse, there was an appetite in investing in affordable housing, and a big part of that was to do with their relationship with Homes England and the grant funding that they felt that they could attract. And I think that's what's going to pin this and what's going to make this successful. It is going to be Homes England investment that we'll need, and that's really the key for me. And I think that speaks to a lot of the developments we've got across the conurbation. You know, as you said, Councillor Bartlett, it's going to need Homes England and government investment and proper substantial investment. And I think that's something that having conversations with the MPs locally, they're supportive of helping us achieve that. So that's really, really positive. But I think as well, for me, because of the question of viability, it's not just if you want to do this successfully, it's not just simply throwing money at it. You know, I think the government also needs to invest in the construction industry. You know, I was reading recently in Homes England that since in Inside Housing, that since 2008 we've reduced the number of employees in the construction industry by 20%. Which is a huge loss. They've recently released a report with 63 recommendations around lowering barriers entry barriers into the industry, and I think government needs to take that on board and needs to invest in that, and not only that, but needs to invest in green construction as well, because as we've seen in terms of the climate action agenda that we had in the previous agenda item, you know, it's something that's going to needs to be done. It's going to cost money, you know. Currently, 90% of the stock we currently have is going to be stock that we have in 2050. So we need to be investing in it retrospectively as well. And I think there needs to be investment within that area. So again, that's something that raised with the MPs, and again, they seem to be wanting to take that away. But I'm supportive of this. I'm supportive of it with the new recommendations set out, and I just as well would like to compliment the leader on her passion for this area of her portfolio. I think she's really revitalised it and brought a new energy to it, and hopefully, you know, like yourself, Councillor Bartlett, you're looking very good for 75. If you weren't such an honest man, I would ask for ID. But like yourself, I've been around quite a long time now, believe it or not, and we haven't put a spade in the ground for this development, you know, and I would like to see something progressing with it. And I think this paper will hopefully see that happen. So yeah, happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Martin.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Leader. Just very briefly, I don't want to particularly compete with Councillor Bartlett for old war stories, but he said he'd been involved, what did you say, for 10 years in terms of this? I think 10 years. So I ran a media campaign in early 2001, I think 2002, to save the Winter Gardens. Of course, that went well, didn't it? And obviously it's been a long time, isn't it? It was actually, I think it was, from memory, it was demolished in 2006, so nearly 20 years. So this whole debate in the former Bournemouth Council through successive administrations, obviously each one having failed to deliver, and it is a failure, isn't it? It's a really important site, and there have been successive people interested in developing it, and different companies and different plans coming forward over that period. And I was actually reflecting in terms of the context of that. That's why I asked you how old you were, because Councillor Wilson was, I think, 4 years of age when all this started off. So there's a bit of context of a site that hasn't, we've not been able to deliver. So I obviously welcome the sort of this new injection of passion and energy into this, and like Councillor Wilson, I hope we can get something done here after all these years. It is an incredibly important site, and one of the things that we can see around Bournemouth now, and I've mentioned this before in other circumstances, we can see lots of stuff happening in Bournemouth in terms of redevelopment, the rebirth of the House of Fraser building, the Ivy coming, and various other things. And one of the key components in the reimagination and regeneration of Bournemouth Town Centre and our other town centres, but particularly Bournemouth, is town centre living. That's a really big part of the future of this town centre, coming back to being a vibrant place where lots of people live, and there's lots of demand for all the businesses and hospitality and leisure offerings in Bournemouth. So in that context, I think this is such an important site, and it's so important that we actually get something done after all these 25 years or so. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Anyone else wishing to contribute? I think the other thing I just wanted to add was discussed last night at overview. I'll come back to you, Councillor Cox, in a moment after I've made this point. The other thing I wanted to add was the amount of money. It's probably what you were going to say anyway, but the amount of money that has been sunk into this site over the years, and which is still going in from a revenue point of view, and trying to get that resolved, because I think we often, it's not taking that long-term approach and finding a way in which we can resolve some of these things that mean they drag on and just cost more and more money. And I think it's those sunk costs that we have a responsibility to try and work out how we're going to deal with those. And so I'm quite looking forward to not just the business plan coming forward, but also the financial modelling for this site, and hopefully that will reveal a little bit more around what level of affordable housing we can offer, and also how we would then approach funding that one. So I'm going to see if Councillor Cox wants to come in.
Thanks, Leader. I think there's, first of all, I welcome the revised proposals, and I think you mentioned that it was you were being realistic, or we're being realistic. I think we are being realistic, and we're being ambitious too. And I think that's important that we are ambitious. I do feel there's been far too much scepticism about BDC and the relationship with BDC, and that from a number of parties, and you can hear it in the contributions that we've had today, both from Councillor Bartlett and from Councillor Canavan. There does seem to be some sort of scepticism as to do we really need this model going forward, but I do think we have to recognise from all parties that that in the past it has been successful, and it's been allowed to drift for too many years. And what I see with the relationship, certainly from the meetings I've attended, is that the partnership has changed and it's been reborn, and I think it's incumbent upon us to move it forward in an ambitious way in order to provide the housing that we so desperately want from all parties. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Right, I'm going to look to Cabinet that we are all in agreement with those recommendations. Can I see an indication, please? Thank you. That's unanimous. So we're moving towards the end of the agenda. Agenda item 16 is urgent decisions taken by the Chief Executive in accordance with the Constitution. Anything to report?
None to report, Leader. None.
Thank you. Agenda item 17 is the Cabinet Forward Plan, and that was published yesterday. So I would advise everyone to have a look at that, including our chairs of scrutiny committees, and consider what they want to include in their forward plans to bring to scrutiny, but also if there's anything wider that you have any questions on at this stage. I think it's important councillors keep an eye on that forward plan so they can always ask, and I would say as Cabinet members we're always keen to discuss what might be coming down the line. So I think that concludes our items of business for today. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us and for being a part of Cabinet, and I'll formally close the meeting. Thank you.